And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. It's fantastic to be here with everyone. Of course, tonight is the X series, the X Steganography series, episode number 53. And we are going deep into the hot zone, and we're not going there alone because Gigi Young is joining us. Gigi, how are you?
Hi, good. And hello, everybody.
It's fantastic to see you. And, you know, it's funny because when we were starting off with this episode, of course, we're joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
Now, it's really interesting. You know, we have so many things, of course, going on in the political world. We covered the Assange arrest last week, which definitely rocked the media world in general. And it's a very serious matter that we're covering on a regular basis. The Mueller report came out yesterday, and all of its ramifications of 2 years of a weird kind of CIA versus the presidency thing reenacting itself over and over again. So we're looking deep at these things, but tonight we are going to look at a different type of politics, and it is the politics of Atlantis Rising. This is something that we've introduced in the way of finding out about a zone that exists between Bimini on one side and the Yucatan Peninsula on the other, and information that that came to me that this is an area that's called the hot zone, because when people are doing contracting work or doing work for the military, they're going deep into this area and they may see ruins, so they are under lock and key not to speak about it. And of course, so the most famous case was Paulina Zalitsky, who found a city off the coast of the western tip of Cuba, and we have covered her story, but her ruins are in the hot zone, and she also, you know, has had quite a lot of difficulty bringing that story to the public. We're going to cover her and a very unsung hero on the hot zone and on Atlantis research and on Atlantis Rising research and the implications of it, a gentleman named Egerton Sykes, who passed away actually in the 1980s, but is somebody who looms large in our search inside the hot zone for answers about this Atlantis Rising. Of course, the mystery school side is well represented by Edgar Casey's work about Bimini being the temple of Poseidia that was rising there, and the Rudolf Steiner anthroposophical movement along with theosophy come up majorly whenever we discuss this area, and they're going to come up again tonight along with a couple of surprises. But right off the bat, Gigi, I have to ask you how, now you, of course, I want to mention this about Gigi, which is Gigi's at gigiyoung.com, but her YouTube channel is incredible and rich with detail and so many different areas that she goes into that I highly recommend it off the bat. Of course, she's a great ally and friend here to the X series. And in working with her and doing psychic investigations with her, you know, that kind of psychic archaeology, I've never run across anyone who can do the things that she can do and tune into those areas. And that's exactly what we need in this kind of an atmosphere.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and glad to be part of it.
Gigi, we all have to say happy birthday to you because we know your birthday was recent too.
Yes.
And one thing you did, which I have to say on Twitter, just to show you have a sense of humor when you do this, of course, but I do understand that you're bringing more wholesome elements to your show, and you've got something going on there that I wanted everyone to see, which is apparently it's going to become a variety show. Is that right? Yes,
it is. That's actually me. That's not
really good. That's good stuff.
That's me. That is me. That's me.
I like bringing wholesome entertainment back.
Was that Dolly originally or something? God, because I just looked down at her chest.
Yeah.
It's not Photoshop.
Oh, yeah.
It says Dolly in the back.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, that's Dolly. And let me tell you that I was not at a loss of pictures that were amazing to place my face on.
You did a great job with it. I have to say, when I saw that you put out a video and it said smudging sacred space, I thought it said smudging secret space. I was like, this is going to be interesting.
You're like, wow, she's really going in this weird direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. This is a whole new direction in SSP now. We knew it had to get there.
Yeah.
But one of the great things about the things we're going to cover tonight is that there's so much rich work and detail around Atlantis as a different type of a force than just this kind of throwaway thing that, you know, people have out there. Oh, it's this mythical thing, and Disney did a movie about it or whatever. We're going to find out that there have been people who have spent their entire lives, like Egerton Sykes, dedicated to bringing this reality of our ancient past and, you know, into our consciousness now, and really looking at something like the work of Graham Hancock. And he talks about how we're a civilization with amnesia. And you can really see that when you go into this work and you say, wow, it's incredible. Researcher after researcher has come up with proven details. But over and over again, we find the American Archaeological Society, all the traditional branches of this kind of history completely throw it out. And so there's a real schism there between the two. We really have a problem going on with the reality on the ground, the research on the ground, and what the traditional establishment will accept about it. And thrown into all that is the work that the intelligence agencies do looking for this stuff while their mouthpieces are saying it doesn't exist. And of course, we're used to that over and over again when you get into the UFO file. When you're talking about the hot zone, I feel like, in a sense, Gigi, it's almost a bigger disclosure than the UFO aspect, because it gets more into us and the fact that we had an advanced culture back there and that we don't remember it.
That's exactly it. It's the fact that when we begin to remember who we are and where we come from. Oh, you froze. Are you okay? Am I okay?
I'm just stunned.
Yeah, it's absolutely all about us remembering who we are. And there's immense distractions to keep us thinking we came from somewhere else entirely, or, you know, an elite group that just happens to be obsessed with Atlantis, doesn't want anyone to know about it. Because when we remember who we are, we actually regain our capacity as humans, as people. We become intuitive again, and we regain abilities. And that's what we talk about with Tuatha de Danann, and all this stuff is about the regaining of our human capacity. And that's why people hide Atlantis, and that's why we want to uncover it. And the hot zone is special because it's kind of like an in-between period where it's not quite Atlantis, which is actually a higher density, maybe a little bit too high for us to comprehend. Like in Casey's work, he talks about there being, you know, non-dense bodies. It's difficult to relate to that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we start to talk about, you know, the hot zone, and we look at a little version of Atlantis, kind of trying again in a little bit of a lower density. So I think we can relate to it a little bit more, but carrying out the same themes.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, that so much of tonight's episode is about the Tuatha de Danann. And we did an episode last fall, which was really quite an unusual episode, because we had all these interesting technical problems, like the entire screen went white, and that, you know, it seemed like there was smoke everywhere, and it was very unusual and bizarre. The episode itself was quite strange. The history of the Tuatha de Danann and this group was very unusual and very well represented by the artist John Duncan. Let's take a quick look at this and then talk about these gifts that they came bearing. And we're going to find out why Egerton Sykes was so convinced that this was a group from Atlantis that had basically dominated the islands after the fact of Atlantis sinking, with all of that technology and all of that magic of the Atlanteans. And how the story of Ireland and the kind of succession of kings in the Tuatha de Danann is all related to this history of Atlantis, and that this is what they were part of. There are researchers out there who attribute the Tuatha de Danann to an extraterrestrial, off-world civilization. But I think that what we can do, without really going, I don't have enough research to really address that end of the question so much. I think that the research that I've done drawing on people like Sykes, and the reports that I can cite from those people, can give us an idea that this was a group that came from Atlantis and had these abilities and powers that seemed just off the charts to these other populations who had lost the ability to do it. Let's take a quick look at the actual group here, just so we know what we're talking about. That is a fascinating shot by John Duncan. Now, there's a very interesting thing about Duncan, also the artist who worked on these, in that he was a top theosophist. So this is somebody who was very well connected into these mysteries. But as we can see, this group is very unusual coming into Ireland to take over. The first thing that they do is they offer to split the island with the group that's there. And they don't, they're like, hey, we can take you on in war, but hey, we'll split the island with you. Just leave us alone. And of course, the people who are there say no way, and the Tuatha de Danann beat them and quite handily and very quickly using strange magic. And they bring 4 gifts with them, though, before we get to this whole area of battle and trying to basically convince the native population to take them on and to not battle with them. And those 4 gifts are something we've been looking at, Gigi. And I want to get into these by taking a look at this. This is just a general representation of what they are. And, we've got the Stone of Destiny, the Invisible Spear, the Shining Sword, and the Cauldron of Dagda. Of course, the Shining Sword is the Sword of Nuada, and the Invincible Spear is the Sword of Lu. And the Stone of Destiny is known as Liafael. So these are very unusual motifs that we're using in this story that come down to us through the very unusual history of the Tuatha. And what's very unusual about them is that they exist both historically and mythologically in Irish memory. So there's actual records of them and their kings and their descendants. So that's on record. There's no question there that they were an actual group who were actually there. But because all of these qualities were ascribed to them, no one can actually believe that, this is an actual group with these strange abilities to disappear and raise from the dead and, regrow limbs and things like that. So when we look at these 4 gifts, I'm convinced Gigi and Egerton Sykes had some of this in his work. There's something in the representation of those 4 gifts that gives us a key to what the Tuatha group, the Tuatha de Danann, were all about. And of course, the name variation with the Tuatha there in the spelling, that Tua in there is just like the 2-eye stone, meaning the people of X in this sense. And what Casey spelled out for what the power stations were that the Atlanteans had, they were, this was the 2-eye stone, which is almost a very similar spelling. And again, it's the people of the stone, in this case, the 2-eye crystal. And that 2-eye crystal made them dominant and on a physical level, but before that was used for spiritual purposes. What are we looking at with these 4 gifts? And I have to say the one I really zeroed in on was the Cauldron of Dagda. What is that all about?
Well, my first look at it was that it's actually pretty traditional. If you really think about, pagan cultures, you usually see a chalice or a cup or a cauldron, which represents the womb of creation. And the womb holds water, a cup holds water. It's really, really traditional, actually. We look at it and we think, oh, what is that thing? A cauldron. It's like the replicator in Star Trek, it creates things out of nothing, but that's what kind of in a way women do, right? And that's kind of what the chalice does. And that's how it's used in ritual. So you can see that carried there, but in their myths, it seems to be used in a more direct way. Like they seem to be using it in a bit more of an advanced way than we would use it in our density with ourselves. But it's
Absolutely
pretty kind of traditional.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. And it's a good point that they were able to introduce these concepts by giving us something very easy to latch onto, like spears, swords, cauldrons, as if it's an advanced group speaking to us on a very kind of base level about things. And yet, just like in the Arthurian myths of drawing the sword from the stone, there are very unusual properties. For example, this rock, the Stone of Destiny, the king who's going to be king of Ireland has to stand on it, and it will make an incredible sound throughout the land, and that's how we will know this is the king. And if someone else stands on there and nothing happens, he's not the one. He moves aside. So that's a very unusual property. That's not traditional.
That one isn't traditional. That's the one. The stone is the one, because you can look at the spear, you can look at the sword, and you can say that's phallic, that's directing energy, that's, you know, you can place that one, but then you look at the stone and you're like, huh. And that's the edge, right? And I think that the stone, for me, and what I've seen in visions and things like that, is that when there's a point where it usually happens in the inner earth, where you can actually control your consciousness to the point where you can start to ring matter, where crystals and stones will start to ring and you can affect it, but you have to be able to basically activate a certain etheric body, I'll say, or a certain number of etheric bodies have to be activated to do that, that correspond with the minerals and things like that. And so if you want a king, you want this person to be having those bodies active. You want them to have sight. You want them to have the virtues that you would have to develop those. You don't want some guy who's going to, you know, lord over people. He can't make the stone ring. He can't control matter.
Yes.
He can't use sound. He can't create sound from his body. He can't use sound like that.
Right,
But
right.
you can make a stone ring, and underground it's easier because you're not in the same energy as on top of the earth, but you can do it on top of the earth as well.
So he has the right of divine kingship because he has this quality in his etheric body that corresponds to what the Tuatha de Danann had. They are bringing in this quality, and the person who comes there in this divine right of the succession of kings has to have the same quality. In this case, something to do with his etheric body, which is above and beyond just the normal population in Ireland at the time.
That's what I would say. And they don't say that he comes with a contraption and stands on the rock. He doesn't have something in his hand that makes the rock sing. He makes the rock sing.
So he has to resonate, something inside of him. He has to be of a particular quality.
That's right. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Of course, the whole story of the group is, as we laid it out last time, is so unusual. And I'm just going to get a snapshot here going that when they show up, they talk about it that they show up in ships. And of course, we know they all use ships to come over, but they're spotted in the heavens. So, you know, it leaves all of these questions about where this group is coming from. But another thing that they do is they cast a gigantic cloud over Ireland for 3 days while they're kind of moving in to get themselves trenched in so that people can't see who they are, what they're doing. And then the way that they're depicted very often over and over again are as giants and as glowing. We know they have these unusual qualities. Gigi, one of the things that you can do, which I couldn't just ask a historian to really look into, is when you tune into this group, what is the nature of the Tuatha de Danann group? I mean, we have some understanding that they're related to this two-eye stone. We have some understanding that they're related to the tribe of Dan, and we see this Dan theme throughout the Middle East and, you know, moving around through Greece. And then, of course, in Ireland. What is it? What's the nature of the group here that we're dealing with in the Tuatha de Danann?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think that I think we get confused, because on one hand, it confused me for a while actually, because on one hand, in Casey's work, he says that the Atlanteans are the Iroquois, right?
Yes.
Have a certain look and a certain complexion, and they're a certain race. And then you have these other beings that are totally different height, they're totally different everything, and they're from Atlantis too.
Right.
So
exactly.
What is an Atlantean then, really? And so that was kind of what I was thinking, is what was going on there. And so what are the Tuatha? I think that they're actually, from what I've seen, is I think that they're actually like an older type of being. And I think they actually originated from a different sphere or connected to a different sphere, and came forward. That's what I think. And I think that the really interesting thing about Atlantis that will help, I think, us all understand what was going on there is that it's a melting pot. And it was about unity. And it wasn't actually about really terrible things that people think that it was necessarily about, but it was about trying to create unity and trying to create oneness with kind of diversity. That's kind of how I've always seen it. And that was one of the groups that was there for that. And that's why America is important. That's why they compare the two, right? So that's how I always, and I see the Tuatha as kind of one of those groups that was maybe gifted in the spiritual arts, specifically.
Wow, absolutely. And it's interesting to me because when we're looking at groups like this, the thing that gets hammered home all the time is Anunnaki. You know, it's Anunnaki this and Sumerian that, right? So we've really had an awful lot of that in the research piles. But these groups, the real groups with actual histories, are ignored, or we just don't know what to make of them, or they're mythologized. But it's very interesting to me because it seems like there's a theme here, just like the echoes in the biblical traditions about these sons of God who come down and sort of mess things up and produce giants. And, you know, at the half and half, you know, the half divinity, half human type. And that seems like what's going on here, because occasionally the Tuatha de Danann do strange things. They don't act, you know, like your normal kind of virtuous types. As a matter of fact, at a certain point, although they start out with this kind of, you know, manner about them, over time, it seems like they start to degenerate. And they even, at the end of the Irish legends, they're losing battles and stuff, which would be off the charts, considering that they have all these magical abilities. Their abilities to call on those qualities seem to be diminishing. What is it about this half divine, half human archetype? What is it that we're getting at there?
Well, a couple of things, I think. One of the things is that I think we have to look at the Earth as an organism. And that how the Earth evolves is through the introduction and connection with basically the cosmos and beings who have done things or specific things that can help Earth. And it's kind of like there's little cross-pollinations that go on, and we go through light and dark phases where we get introduced to helpful beings and we get introduced to kind of darker beings. And Earth isn't really a closed system, but there is a really big difference between a visitor that comes here from another place through a portal or whatever, however you want to do that, and someone who comes from the inner Earth, or someone who comes from, I guess, the center of the Earth portal. There's different ways to come here, and what appears to me is that this group was actually coming from the inner Earth to incarnate here. If someone's just coming and visiting, they're not looking to incarnate here. So there's a little bit of a difference between interdimensionals and beings from outer spheres that just visit, and ones that come through the inner Earth, imbue themselves with the energy, and begin an incarnational cycle here, where they are subject to all of the same laws that everybody else is. And that's why over time you see them degrade. As Atlantis falls, the density shifts, and they lose their abilities and they lose their memories like everybody else. So that's a little bit of a difference there between two different types of interdimensional beings coming to Earth in different ways.
Well, that's really interesting, because we're looking at groups who can incarnate into the regular system of our history, who come from somewhere else. It's interesting. I'm going to fast forward to the end of the Tuatha story, and then we're going to go back and see what Egerton Sykes had to say about this group and why he thought they were this extension group out of Atlantis after Atlantis fell, and that they ruled Bimini and then eventually came to Ireland. But before we get there, at the very end of the Tuatha de Danann cycle, the story ends with them losing a battle, and they basically are a large group, and the king says, well, I can't just get rid of them, so I'll tell you what we'll do. You can rule underground and we'll rule above ground, basically, but this is how we're going to get rid of you. And the Tuatha de Danann basically become the Mound Builders. and they retreat into this mound, and everyone knows basically not to go near there because they have all these supernormal abilities. All those legends throughout Irish history that give us fairies, that give us the fae, that give us she, all of these different unusual supernatural qualities all come as an echo from the Tuatha de Danann stories. So what is it that we're getting at when we look at the end of the Tuatha story and we see them kind of there as an echo in a legend? They ruled for over 1,500 years in Ireland. And so we're faced with kind of a large contradiction of this kind of supernatural fairy type group and an actual lineage where we can trace their kings. So it seems like, I guess my question for you ultimately is, what happened to them?
Well, I think part of them is walking amongst us. And I think they're here. And yeah, I think they're here. And I think some went back underground. The underground is very interesting because you just can't let go in the inner earth. The inner earth changes depending on what etheric bodies you have activated. You have to have the keys open, so you can't just go like, "Ooh, I'm going Admiral Byrd in the middle of the earth." Like that's not really. I mean, that's very literal. You have to have certain things going on. So some I think retreated back over time. I think there was a period of windows where I think some went back in the earth, and I think some walk amongst us actually and are doing their thing. But there was a lot of battles going on, and there were warring groups talking badly about each other, lying about each other. And so, not every group is as understood as they should be.
Well, it's really fascinating. They came out with a story about these two astronauts who were twins, and they were tracking them medically, and they realized that when they came back from circling the Earth, that their DNA had changed. So
Wow.
you say this about, So now when you say that about going down underground, living underground, and how it's not just, something that is a very easy kind of transition, your actual DNA would probably change the same way as when people go into space.
I didn't know that, but that's amazing. Yeah. And our DNA has crystalline components to it, and there's all sorts of resonating things that are going on, and a lot. Yeah, it's really complex. And that's what I would say went on, is someone underground. And then maybe if they came up, it's like a time capsule of a person. It's like, they started evolving in a little bit of a different way.
Do you think that when we look at their descendants and stuff, we're looking at psychics? We've done so many shows in the Orphic Circle, for example, and the things that we learned from Emma Britton about who they were, and how they would sort of do surveys looking for psychically gifted individuals. Do you think these are people, like we know Irish people and Scottish people have this incredible tendency towards psychic abilities? Is this a quality that might be a remnant, a leftover from this group?
Yes, I think so. I think especially particular abilities probably, and I think it is a remnant. I don't think it's a coincidence. And I also believe that there are bloodlines that were preserved to actually keep certain incarnations possible and to keep certain messages alive. So there are people that were guarding bloodlines that could actually contain certain souls. And so you can see it in a very direct way with certain things being shepherded till certain times, not forever, but till the energy needed to be, the energy would switch at a certain point. So certain genetics needed to be maintained, and then it could flip and you didn't have to do it anymore. But there were time periods where certain bloodlines had to be held so that certain incarnations could happen. And then you have also really great, wild, amazing psychics that just happen naturally, and things like that. So you can see it both kind of being done very intentionally, and then you can also see it happening just organically. You can see, in regards to psychic ability.
it's really interesting. It reminds me of what Casey had to say about the Essenes. And the Essenes were the mystical group that, John the Baptist and Elijah, it's kind of the school of the prophets. And their whole group was set up around the idea of, studying numerology, astrology, and all these different things. And that's the bloodline. That's the setup for how the Christ incarnation happens. It's a long-term mystery school project. And that's what it sounds like you're talking about there.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but I sort of had some visions about that one day, and I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. Well, that completely makes sense because, every little thing, the soul has to emerge in a certain way. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
Before I break into this information about Sykes in the hot zone, I'd like you to describe a little bit about the process that you go through when you achieve, when you're tuning into something and when you achieve a kind of psychic vision about something. I do realize we've looked at a lot of different psychics throughout history, and it seems like a lot of them go into these trance conditions. And what's unique about what you do is you stay conscious when you're tuning in to these things. How does this process happen with you?
Yeah, it happens pretty naturally. For me, it was just about validating it and growing it. I just basically, I've learned that it actually comes through the activation of specific etheric bodies that you can learn to traverse and connect with. You have to develop them. Once they're developed, you can inhabit them and you can connect with them and you have access to different things. And I don't do deep trance. I've never tried. I just never tried to do deep trance stuff. It's always just happened almost like I'm in two places. It's like I'm in two places at once. That's kind of what it's like. It's like multitasking.
Right. Well, that's interesting actually, because I think about Casey's work, and one of the unusual things that's always struck me about him is that when he would go into trance to give a reading, he would actually be having a dream at the same time as the reading was happening. So there's actually like three functions going on there if you think about it.
Yeah, it's honestly a mystery. I think anybody who says they know exactly how psychic functioning works, like, I don't know. I think the secret is just becoming comfortable enough in it and just trusting it and allowing it to happen, and then you get the best information, however it happens for you, I guess.
Fascinating. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We are deep into the X Steganography series 53, and this one is dealing with the work of Egerton, Sykes, and Druids in the hot zone, and what this Tuatha de Danann group was all about and how it relates to what Sykes was looking at in terms of Atlantis Rising. Miss Olivia?
I just wanted to throw out a comment that Beau Krill said, Gigi's psychic gift is derived from her Rh negative blood, which I also suspect is responsible for her beautiful hair. But I would just ask, based on that, seriously, Gigi, do you think that you incarnated, do you think that a soul would incarnate or choose to incarnate in a body that would have something like Rh negative blood if they intended to become a psychic so it would be easier?
Right, and you don't have to confirm if you have Rh negative blood or not, but just
for the
hypothetical.
I've never stated that blood type because I know better than that. That three. But blood type does matter. Every little nuance of you matters. Specifically, blood type is part of your water. I mean, so is your lymph, but it's really important in creating a certain perspective and how you perceive the world. But you can be psychic with any blood type. Absolutely, everybody has the glands to do so. But some people choose specific abilities or specific perceptions, and they have certain blood types. But it's not an exclusive thing.
Right. Absolutely. Was that all you had on that?
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, Gigi, why do you think, this is just how I think all the time, is why do we choose the particular vessels that we incarnated into in this particular lifetime?
Just the physical vessels?
Yeah. I mean, you do believe that we chose these vessels, right?
Every
That there's some control over that before we incarnate.
Every detail, everything. Yeah. It's all, everything has a spiritual significance and everything has a perspective. And so we choose all of that for, to basically experience our life the way that we need to in order to move through our karma or move through our desired life. Because we're here to heal. We're here to merge back with spirit. And so we choose the vehicle that gives us the best perspective. And it's difficult in 3D to understand the nuance of every skin color for us and every type of thing, but they all have a very distinct experience that helps us understand ourselves and each other and also evolves the world. It's very, everything is significant.
Why is the psychic side of people generally in society played down or made into kind of like almost like a black magic thing, like, hey, we'll pull it out for a movie, you know, like we have a super psychic for the movie. But in regular society, it's sort of frowned upon. It's not supposed to be something that's real. What's going on there?
I would put it down to one word: discernment. When you become intuitive, when you become a psychic, when you become to see, you see everything for as it is. It's not just like you see grandma and you can do a reading and you're a medium now. You see the problems in the world. You see when people are lying to you, when people are not being authentic to you. You see more, you sense more, you know more. Not only that, you start remembering other lives. You start remembering how the earth used to be. And suddenly you're not so easily controlled. How could you be? You remember, oh, it's going on again. It's here we go again. Or this reminds me of this.
Yeah, yeah. Your awareness level is totally different.
Yeah, you can't, you just cannot be controlled. You just really can't. Not if you can see everything and you remember.
Wow, it's fascinating. It's interesting to me because I read so many stories about people who walked around in their lives, and you know, Steiner had unusual things where he would see apparitions and he would see dead relatives and things like that. And Casey also, Blavatsky, the same thing. When they got on a certain level, those qualities became normal for them. But for most of us, it's quite, you know, it's quite an unusual thing to imagine being able to tune in and, you know, read somebody's thoughts and all the rest of it. But that's something that you deal with just in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I always see dead people, and I see, you know, lights in the sky, and it is, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. Usually you get used to it and kind of build up your threshold, and your spirit guides will test you. And as long as you don't get frazzled, and as long as you don't, you know, lose your mind, you'll get better and better and better at it. If you're too frightened, you don't pass your initiation, and it just keeps trying. And there's some people that stay at the same initiation their whole life, and then some people develop. So, but it does absolutely, it just becomes, it does become normal, and you choose, obviously, whether or not you want if you're having a psychic experience, you can choose to not engage with it. You can choose to say no and move away from it. You don't have to, you're not a victim of your abilities, you know, so.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. When you get into areas like dealing with the mystery schools, when you get into areas of dealing with the subject of Atlantis and Atlantis Rising, if you're not, what I found is that if you don't take the psychic aspect into consideration and exercise it, you'll never be on the same level of the people who place the information like the Hall of Records there in the first place. So it's kind of a losing battle when people are like, well, you know, we didn't find pottery from such and such an era, so, you know, we can't imagine anything more powerful being around back there. You need these abilities if you're going to study the mystery schools or Atlantis Rising or things of this nature. You need to be able to call on those kind of psychic faculties of humanity in order to learn the truth. That's the way that I see it. And is that something when you look at something, for example, like Atlantis Rising, we can't really understand it just as a scientific phenomena of geology.
It's not, and I don't actually think that geology behaves in a linear way, actually, either. I think that, geology responds to our consciousness. And that's why we start discovering these things on sites we've already dug and things we've already looked, is that it actually responds to our consciousness. So I think we look at that completely wrong.
Wow, right.
But yeah, it's really more about, I feel like, getting our memory body back and remembering who we are. And then we'll find that it was written all along and that it was there all along and that we're so powerful that we are blocking ourselves. And that's the path.
Amazing. And this is the period of rediscovery of these things. There's no question about it, with the mystery school revelations pouring into our culture over the past century or more. Even Casey's revelations about the Bimini Wall rising. And it's interesting because Bimini crisscrosses with the work that Sykes was doing. So we're going to get into that. But one of the things I think is a setup for all this would be good is the geopolitics that are going on in this area that we're calling the hot zone right now are completely off the charts. And I want to show a picture of this area that we're describing. By the way, we're going to be doing questions in the second half of the broadcast. So for Olivia, do all the questions in caps, and it'll be all the questions that you have for Gigi Young, carte blanche, because Gigi's here. We're going to take advantage of it. So go ahead and do that. And a couple of things. I want to also remind everyone to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter, and that's something that keeps us in touch. The incredible throwdown on social media with sites getting blocked and people just being deplatformed at the drop of a hat. We know what we're up against, basically. I would say the best way for us to stay in touch is just to be part of the newsletter. So if those systems go down, those platforms short circuit, something new will always come along. But in the meantime, it's good if we have that back and forth. So get on board and tighten those things up. In looking at Gigi's work, gigiyoung.com, Gigi, you're doing now the second level of an intuition course. And I want to mention that here before we go any further.
Yeah, I teach courses as well, so you can get in touch with your intuition. My most recent one is protection, so that you feel confident and that you're educated on what the densities are, dimensions are, and how to hold your energy and all of that. Psychic functioning is normal. It is your birthright. It's yours. And it will help you in more ways than you can ever imagine. And you don't have to take my course. Just please research it. Please, develop it. That's all I have to say. That's my PhD over.
No, listen, the course is that's where you want to do it. Do it with Gigi. That's the way I look at it.
So I want to take this course. How long is it, Gigi?
Oh, Olivia, you can just, I'll send you the links.
Fantastic.
This is something that's interesting because, of course, starting and opening up to those abilities is part of what it comes down to. Over and over again, we see solutions offered in different situations that, if we could just put this one politician in prison, or if we could just get this one group out of there, then everything would be hunky-dory. But the truth is, the society very often can reflect the individuals themselves, and the higher the individuals aspire, the society changes. That's the kind of changing geography too, like you were talking about.
Wow. The more that we hold ourselves accountable and take responsibility for our shortcomings, the more leadership will change. But we have to take leadership in our own lives to change leadership. So many people just bang at the doors of other people to change their lives. It doesn't work that way. And there's a lot of distractions. The same wars are going on that have always gone on with different names. And we have to realize that we are 0 point. And that by changing ourselves and developing our awareness, we can start being that eye of the storm.
I like that. We are 0 point. That sounds like a rock band.
It actually is. With Dolly.
Right, exactly.
And Dolly.
What's amazing about that actually is and I'm just going to, a little aside here, we have gone in the past couple of weeks through a bizarre roller coaster of political action. And, I came up with a new term, which I'm going to roll out in some of my reports that are coming up, which is called promo intel. And promo intel is when these groups come along and they say, hey, everything's going to be fascinating. Don't worry about it. Here's your 2 minutes hate, and you guys are going to be psyched because George Soros is going to Gitmo and he's going to be shot between the eyes and everyone will feel better. this kind of weird Cabal Arrest, Ben Fulford, Wilcox stuff, all that thing took a tremendous blow because all those groups were saying that the Mueller report was going to be a big indictment of Hillary Clinton, and there's nothing about Hillary in there at all. It was a complete sham, and that promo intel that all those people got into and paid for and pumped up and Cabal Arrests were promised, well, the thing deflated like a balloon, and all these groups are just out there scrambling, for some kind of excuse for why they were all wrong. There was nothing in the Mueller report that indicted Hillary Clinton at all.
Yep, it's like they want you to either take a sleeping pill and just relax and say nothing, it's all covered, it's in the bag, or they want you to get out and get all your energy out and bang around, and then you're exhausted and you go to sleep. But heaven forbid, please do not go sit on your meditation pillow and think for yourself for 5 minutes. Don't do that.
Right.
But, trust the plan or whatever it is, and don't say anything and stay quiet and we got this. Or it's like, be very angry and just spread just basically hate around, so it's
fascinating because Livia and I were talking about this, and what happened was during this whole process of Assange getting grabbed, there were those groups that were coming out and saying, trust this, trust the process, trust the plan, and don't worry, this is a master stroke, a chess move that the Trump administration is doing, everything's under control. And during the course of that program, I brought forward the fact that no, he's going to be face down in some jail cell being interrogated, and they're going to try to squeeze every bit of political information out of him that they can. That's the reality of the situation. Yeah. So what happened was his mother came forward, and she said specifically in reference to Q, she said, don't trust this PSYOP. Real things are happening, and don't think it's some kind of masterful plan to take my son to some vacation land in America. They're basically grabbing him and imprisoning him, and he's a journalist. So I think it was a real shock. It was like water in the face when you look at it. But as I've pointed out, the independent media gets so, kind of infiltrated by marketing ops and intel ops, and we're squeezed from both sides over and over again, all the while having the corporate mainstream media feeding us their own narratives. It's quite a situation.
Yeah, I agree with what Olivia said the other night when she was like, I would rather just passionately speak my truth and come forward. And if there's a plan, then great, that's awesome. But while that's apparently going on, I'm going to fight and I'm going to speak out. And I think that's the attitude we have to have, is just assume, don't ever assume there's a plan. Because that could easily just be a lie. So we have to be really careful with just being, fed the hopium.
All right, absolutely, no question about it. And it is fascinating because there are so many different things in the information that's coming out in the past couple of weeks. The Assange arrest, the Mueller report, and the Mueller report showing that huge witch hunt that the CIA was on to destroy the presidency. Just this amazing thing going on there. And of course, you can like or hate whoever is in the presidency at the time, but the idea that the CIA would have the ability to just, call their number in and take this guy out, we've seen enough of that in history with how they've done it. So I think it is quite a remarkable period. Oddly enough, the things that we're talking about tonight play into all this, and this is what really fascinates me the most, because there are all these geopolitical considerations heating up now in the hot zone. And let's talk about why this might be. Well, first of all, Putin has said that if you want a new Cold War and a new Cuban Missile Crisis, you got it. And he said that in reference to having military presence in Venezuela. And we have some neocons now in the Trump administration, like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who both should be removed from office, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, who were saying you should go after Iran and you should bully Venezuela, and if Russia gets in there, you should threaten them, and all this stuff. And Trump came in without doing all that. But in any case, it's very odd that suddenly, all over again, just like during the Kennedy administration, when there was this Kennedy-Hemingway deal in place around this idea of the hot zone and the information that Hemingway had in Cuba. And I have a document here that whenever I discuss these things, I have this document handy. because it shows an actual national security incident taking place in relation to the Kennedy administration and Hemingway's estate while he was still alive. So it's very unusual when we look at it like that. But here we are, and suddenly there's war with Venezuela, which is again affecting this very unusual strata. And now the Trump administration is pulling out of diplomatic relations with Cuba, who we had just finally established after 50 years, relations with again at the end of the Obama administration. So very unusual moves taking place. Let's take a look at where the hot zone is so everyone knows what we're talking about. This is the area, and there's a lot of very unusual things in this area. One of the main things about Cuba there on that side, and then Bimini right off the coast of Miami and the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, I'm going to draw on some mystery school information here, and I think that we can also draw on some cosmologies in relation to this. One is the Casey readings purport that here at Bimini, we have something which is called the Temple of Poseidon, which is rising. And he says that there's a Hall of Records there and here. The Hall of Records idea, Gigi, one of the interesting things that he says in relation to those records, he uses the term 32 over and over again in describing what the contents are in those records. This number 32 strikes me as unusual.
Yeah, I think there's a lot with 32. It's obviously a huge number with secret societies. We know that.
Absolutely, yes. Let's go Masonic. Strong.
Yeah, right. But they, a lot of even the darker qualities are just parasitic to real things, real concepts. So, real magic just being kind of used in a bad way. Yeah, we have our spinal cord associated with that, our teeth, and I think that it just represents, for me at least, the materialization of matter, and also different phases of that. It also connects them with the seals that we were talking about with Steiner, and different levels, different degrees, and has a lot to do with that.
It's pretty unusual when you think about a 33rd degree Mason. I guess you get out of the 32, but the tablets and the information contained in the Hall of Records, it's more than just sort of stumbling across what would look like to us a tomb and here's some records. Because what's interesting is that Casey talked about how the two-eye stone literally could be the plans for it were still there, preserved. And I feel like maybe it's a misinterpretation on the part of the powers that be. But since they know something about this two-eye stone, since they've studied it, there's actually a CIA study from 1964 that gives us information relating to the fact that they were looking into Casey's prediction that there's a Hall of Records underneath the right paw of the Sphinx. So the CIA spent the time to look into this and actually do it. So we know about that on record. It's been declassified. It's no longer a mystery. The question is, why? Obviously, they take it very seriously.
Yeah, they would, because it would have essentially the answers it would give them all the power. It would give them all of the wisdom, all the knowledge. It's like another version of the Rosetta Stone in a way. Really, for human beings, it would give them an immense amount of power, knowledge. But you can't just access it. You can't just access it. So there's that.
Interesting. It's an interesting point, actually, about what it would represent in terms of a turning point for humanity. For example, if we discover that there was an advanced civilization, that their activities went worldwide, and that they were based in the hot zone, and that they were part of a larger continent of Atlantis. That's pretty heavy duty for a culture to absorb with facts on the ground. But we've had really good researchers who, after doing all that research, this is the final conclusion that they came to, and that's one of them was Egerton Sykes. It wasn't just Steiner, and it wasn't just Theosophy or Casey operating on mystery school knowledge. Of course, the mystery schools keep that information, and they keep the historical aspect. But even traditional researchers like Velikovsky and Sykes, they came to the conclusion based on totally different set of tools.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's definitely very secret. So I think that you'd be better to find it in little individual ways, like with Sykes or, Velikovsky, than you would any mainstream. You're just not gonna find that. Or you would remember it yourself. You have memories of being involved, or you know.
So you think when the CIA does UFO disclosure, it's probably not a good idea to follow that kind of disclosure?
I don't think that the government has anything to do with disclosure. I don't think that they have anything to do with it. I really don't. I understand that there are certain tools and certain things that have been hidden, but the more that they get their fingers in that pot, the more crooked it will become. And what the disclosure is really about is about consciousness. Because even if you want to go to the 3D crafts and the ships and all the technology, you still need consciousness. That's how they all function at that level, at the precise level, the really precise level. So all roads lead to consciousness, and we need to start going to that route and then getting everything else that we need, rather than thinking that, people who have betrayed us a million times are finally going to come forward with exactly what we need. We'll always be hungry. So we have to be.
You see National Geographic citing the CIA and NASA saying, we are not alone. Something's afoot. And it doesn't seem good. And like you say, that's not the place you want to go to.
The threat, like even recently, like I like to observe, like, like what are they going to say about it? Like I kind of listen to what they want to swing it as. It's like, it's a threat. And they make you afraid
yes, absolutely.
Yourself, basically. And they have these certain narratives that they want to spin. And so I say just go inward. It's cliche, but it's the answer.
Absolutely. Everyone, we're here with Gigi Young. You're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's episode 53 of the X series, and we're going deep into the geopolitics of the hot zone and some of the history and lore of the Tuatha de Danann around this. And we're going to get into why one of the premier Atlantis researchers, Egerton Sykes, thought that the Tuatha de Danann was operating in the hot zone. One of the things I wanted to check in before I get into this is, Miss Olivia, do you have something?
Nope, we're good for now.
Excellent. We're going to take questions in the second half of the program, promise. And so save them for Gigi. Ask them in all caps, and we'll make sure we get to them. One of the things I want to point out is there's a couple of terms I want to catch everyone up on, which I started the show with, which is the hot zone. The hot zone being that area between Bimini and Yucatan and the surrounding area, and even reaching into the Caribbean. Now, the reason it's called the hot zone, as I described, is because if you're operating there and you're military, or if you're non-military and you're a contractor, you might have an oceanography job or whatever. What started to happen is I started to get information from people, in particular one person that I was able to confirm through other people, that they were doing work contracting on the oceanography side in this area, and that they called the area that had ruins the hot zone. That is, they didn't want people to report on things that they saw there. And if they happened to see anything in there, they had to submit it, but they had to sign an NDA that they didn't see anything. So there have been people who told me that they were involved in mapping the ocean floor and that this same issue had arisen. But what was fascinating to me was that at a certain point, a large-scale archaeological researcher who's done a lot of this type of work confirmed the term, the hot zone, with me, and that they had heard it as far back as 1995. So the hot zone is definitely some kind of reality. It's some term that these groups are using, and they are aware that these ruins are there. Now, in speaking about what the ruins could be, there's no question, if you look at the record, going back to the Casey prediction about Atlantis Rising, he said they'll start to see this Temple of Poseidia off Bimini, and it'll be in 68 or 69, and that's when they found the Bimini Wall. Now, oddly enough, Sykes, in his work, he has looked into the Celtic names for these different islands, and one of them was called Myria or Mirius. And the term itself, Gigi, as you and I both found out, meant wall.
Wall. Yeah, it meant wall.
And then we see these sunken walls around Bimini, and we see Sykes' work saying this group was operating out of Bimini.
Behind a wall.
Behind a wall.
Yeah.
So we start to, it starts to add up. There's no question about it. One of the things that Sykes' work takes us into is this idea of crystal temples in Nereus, which he cites over and over again in these Celtic legends, which he wound up doing a complete edited version of all of them. This is a very complete individual, and I want to get a picture of Sykes up here for everyone just to appreciate. That's Ernest Hemingway. That's a little different. This is Sykes at the end of his life with his wife and an Atlantis researcher who caused quite a flap when she had spotted underwater ruins and had brought the story out in the early 70s. But Sykes basically was a British intelligence officer. He'd been through World War I and World War II, and he developed a fascination for Atlantis based on the fact that he was hearing things that the better we got at being underwater with submarines and everything else during World War II, they started to see a lot more. And that he felt that there were three groups involved in the hot zone with these prehistoric ruins. One of the groups was Russia, another one of the groups was Cuba, and the United States, and that China was a more kind of a latecomer in the 60s and 70s to this. But all those groups are very fascinated in trying to get involved with these ruins. Now, we had the incredible discovery by Paulina Zalitsky and her group off the western tip of Cuba, off basically that point that's called San Antonio. And off the tip there, she found wide-scale ruins off of Cuba. Now, we've certainly gone into Zalitsky's work, so I'm just going to do kind of a snapshot here. But this is some idea of the ruins that she took pictures of under the water. Now, she sent submersibles down there, and she had said that by looking through the cameras and the submersibles that she had seen hieroglyphics, and she started to describe them. And the interviewer said, well, those hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and she said, no, Mayan hieroglyphs, much more like that. So we're looking at a civilization there that existed, and one of the things that she said is that they found a mountain range between Yucatan and Cuba. So we're looking at a civilization that existed probably after Atlantis fell, and it had its own period, and then it fell as well. And these are the ruins, and it's somehow related directly to this Mayan culture that came later. You spent time looking at this story in the Cuban ruins. What is your impression of what's going on down there?
Yeah, I think it was basically exactly what was said, which is a migrating Atlantean group trying to recreate and reestablish society with the technology, with a changing technology, because crystal technology behaves differently depending on the individual, depending on the density, and you have to recalibrate it, so they're trying to reestablish that in this different location. They're following ley lines, right? And ley lines aren't just ley lines. They're not just energy lines, just like your body has nadis. They're not just energy lines. They represent certain things, and they align with the cosmos as well. So they have certain charges to them, and things have to be built in certain places. And so they were doing this, and that also—
You're talking about Cape Canaveral and code there, I can tell.
And there's also the mounds, which are kind of like that as well. Certain things have to be built in certain places according to energy shifts and the cosmos and things like that. So that's what they were doing. That's what I believe they were doing. Because I believe that certain groups from Atlantis worked very interconnectedly with the planet. And that's how the technology also worked. And so that's why you see the crystalline stuff there as well. Because if it's crystalline technology like that, it's being used in a specific way, or it was used in a specific way.
Well, it's fascinating. There are all these serpent representations in Bimini, and we know that if you go to the United States, you've got in Ohio, in particular, the serpent mounds. There are so many great people doing exciting books, like Graham Hancock's doing America Before, and Andrew Collins is doing another book with Greg Little, and they're doing it about the mounds in America and how that relates to Atlantis. But you've had some really interesting insights about the serpent mounds and how this relates to a kind of a symbol with Venus. I thought that was very interesting because Venus comes up over and over again in the Steiner lectures as a very unusual thing. And you and I did an episode a little over a month ago on the switch between Mercury and Venus. What is it about the serpent mounds and this Venusian aspect? What is it, at least even on an esoteric level, that was happening there? And what is the echo that we see when we look at these mounds?
Yeah, there's lots of things going on with serpents and I think spirituality and the Venusian sphere. In the simplest way, it represents Kundalini energy, represents our raw life force energy, and somebody who would be able to make the stone ring or would be able to be masterful of that energy. And so another way you can look at that is cosmically. There are certain psychics who can actually see lines of energy in the sky that move like serpents. And you can read these lines, you can read these serpents in the sky or dragons in the sky, and they'll give you energy about time and about where things are going. And it's a very high dimensional way of life. But if you have that part of you active, you can connect with that. And so there's a lot of negative things about serpents, but we also have to look at what the holy part is, and the connection to life force and Kundalini, and the power to see energy as well, higher dimensional energy.
Wow, that's fascinating. That the fact that these things withstood so much time and that they still exist. Whenever I've looked at mounds, and the mound builders, of course, in the Casey readings, are fleeing Atlanteans. That's the way he describes who's building the mound. But whenever I've looked at them, I've always said it seems to me that they're trying to protect themselves from something outside. My first thought was the sun. But it seems like, rather like the Indians just adopted an outdoor culture. What is this about going underground in these mounds surrounded by earth and dirt?
I think that well, the mounds always appeared as certain acupuncture points and as battery points, because what they're doing, they're always doing it in line with the planet. But I think it also has to just do with having to be in that energy, in a specific energy, and close to a certain place. And that's what I would say. It probably would also have to do something to do with the sun as well. Because if you're from another sphere, or, and your body's adjusting, then you may have a different sun, and there might be something about your body that's not exactly the same. There could be something with that. I don't think you're completely wrong with that. Maybe there is something to that.
I'm willing to be wrong. It always struck me as such an obvious thing. Like, I guess if you were really being overpowered by something outside, you try to dig in as far as you could.
Well, yeah, there were wars going on.
That'd do it. Yeah.
And so, they were being chased essentially by the past, by the people who didn't want to change, essentially. Didn't like the new beings, didn't like the new way of being, didn't want to evolve, didn't want to grow, didn't want to adapt. And so there are groups that did not want that. They wanted to stay in the past, and they wanted to
finish that.
And so they would chase away the newer beings, or they would chase away, and that's how the battle starts. But the really sad thing about that type of interaction, I'll just say the ones who refuse to change, the ones who refuse to integrate and grow, it doesn't really matter, because the earth has grown and the cosmos has grown. And so what ends up happening is they end up trying to use and exploit the people from that I would say the Tuatha or a certain group, they'll try to exploit them because they don't have what they should be growing into. And that's where the weird parasitic magic comes from, and certain things that you'll see and hear about comes from just because you refuse to change doesn't mean you don't need that energy. And so that's where a lot of very dark parasitic stuff comes from, is that very dark kind of interaction between two forces that are esoterically at war.
It sounds very much like the Sons of Emilius and Sons of Belial in Casey's story. One of the things that he said about the Emilius group was that they were using the two-eyed stone as a way to have interaction with beings from the outer spheres, meaning they were directly training these priestesses to become conduits for this interaction that would happen with actual spiritual beings through that training through the two-eyed stone. But what's fascinating is the Belial group used it, according to him, as a death ray, sending out from different power stations. So I guess you could build a mound for that.
You could build a mound for that. Yeah, there's all different types of ways that you could do that. But yeah, it's also really important to note that there's different dimensions and densities, and just because you're talking to a spirit doesn't mean that it's like a really good one. So you can have really good witches and good psychics, and you can also have ones that are really connecting with really tricky, dark beings. So the crystal or the technology will only accentuate who you are. So even though they're using the same technology or a similar technology, they're not using it the same way. So
it's amazing because in Casey's work, he talks about the reverence that the Emilius group had for the two-eye crystal, but how so much of the population thought of it as the terrible crystal because of the Belial group and how they used it. What is the legacy to humanity of the two-eye crystal?
I think it's a warning. I think it is a warning. I think that on one hand, it represents our potential.
Yeah.
Our potential to live in a better way, a more heart-connected way, and it shows us what we could have. And then on the other hand, it also shows us that we can play with fire, and it can show us that when something is that powerful, how terrible it can be. And so it stands as an inspiration, but it also stands as a great warning. And it's always telling you to do your work. It's kind of a great metaphor for that.
Wow, fascinating. Everyone, we're here with Gigi Young, and Gigi is just very gifted in these areas of, I call it psychic archaeology, but she has this ability to really place herself in those time periods, which is always something I'm amazed at when I have worked with her on these things. And Gigi, you really have that incredible ability. One of the things when we use that, and we go back and look at these periods of time where things broke off, when these groups now are looking in the hot zone, and so we have this almost war breaking out over the Venezuelan situation with the Russians coming in and them saying, you know what, we'll give you a new Cuban Missile Crisis and all the rest of it. When we look at that, what are those groups, and like the groups that Sykes observed, who were moving in and trying to get their hands on those archaeological relics that are underground? What is it that they're aiming for? Do you think that they're aiming for the ability to use that higher technology? Or do you think that those groups know something about what it is?
Yeah, I think they know what it is. I think they have access to that information. I think they're elite groups and they have access to that information. And they want that power. That's the ultimate power.
Fascinating. Miss Olivia.
Do you want a question?
Sure.
Esoteric 369 Wall wanted to know about the link between the Mound Builders and the Giants.
Wow, well, those stories always go hand in hand. But of course, there are giants in the story of the Tuatha de Danann also, and mounds, if you think about it, because at the end, that's what they disappear into, the mound of She. So actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because the group that the Tuatha de Danann face off against and have the most problems with are these Fomorians. And the Fomorians look to me, from the various depictions and things we hear about them, kind of like Fallout nuclear accident victims that mutated and became giants and all kinds of weird things. And some of them have like mixed, appendages of animals, and they're half human. This is the depiction that Duncan did based on the Celtic legends. And as you can see, I mean, they're very unusual. This is a very freakish kind of group, but they still had amazing powers and would give the Tuatha incredible problems. And they, at a certain point, one of the kings of the Tuatha was half Fomorian and half Tuatha, and he wound up basically betraying the Tuatha de Danann. And so this is part of the lore of that period. The fallout from the destruction of Atlantis and the use of the Two-Eye Stone, it created various mutations, and some of those mutations may have had their own kind of black magic abilities.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Those people look pretty. I feel kind of bad for those ones. They look pretty gnarly. But yeah, you can. Geez, one was like just. One was just basically like a.
No wonder they called it the terrible crystal. It's
yeah. Well, the technology is neutral, but whoever's using it can, create what they want, right? And so we've moved down density, so it's kind of like we're trying to do that with AI now. We can't do it the same way, that happened on Atlantis, like all kind of more, I think maybe more biologically there or something, but
yeah.
We're still trying to create, I think there's a push to create our own Fomorians. And maybe they would have their own magic.
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. The transhumanism has this kind of mutated feature to it. There's something that is always somewhat repulsive when they get into that transhumanism aspect and the way that they portray cyborgs and things. And Olivia had great fun making fun of the Sophia robot.
Oh, God. No, it's torturous.
But it was interesting because you went on Twitter and did it, and you got a huge response from what you were saying about it.
I did. Most people supported me.
Yes. And what were you saying?
Don't get me started.
No, just in a snapshot.
People, even after all the science fiction, people do not understand the implications of creating an entity which is going to be superior to humans. We are creating our own demise. It's obvious. I mean, I don't have to even illustrate different examples from science fiction. Sophia, when you have an android, when you have a being that doesn't age, that, doesn't mind a paper cut, being human is to be weak, and fragile and vulnerable in all kinds of ways. So creating something that doesn't die, that doesn't age, that can learn so quickly, and you just put a chip in it and it's, IQ is 250. I mean, why are humans necessary? So even the brilliant minds that are creating Sophia right now and AI and all this, the idea that they will be immune somehow to depopulation, because they're so brilliant. The robots that they're creating are going to be so much more brilliant, so superior that really
they'll carry out the arrogance of the creation.
Well, I mean, no, it's pragmatism, right? It's, say, humans are a mess. We know it, right? Like many people think the Earth would be better off without us anyway. And those are humans who feel that. So of course, robots are going to feel that they'd be better stewards of the planet, and they probably would be. So anyway, I think that we're creating our own population dystopian future.
I love that. Well, the Skynet warned us in the Terminator movies.
Well, why call her Sophia? I mean, are we?
Yes.
I mean, if you don't, I mean, if what Olivia says doesn't give you chills up your spine and make you stare at the wall for half an hour, why are they calling her Sophia? Mm-hmm. If that doesn't show a ceremonial and a negative intention, just look up what Sophia is. Sophia has, and then like on top of it all, she like makes these bizarre like faces, and like she has no like hair or anything. Like they just like, poor Sophia, you know. Like, but anyway, they're using the word.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, that's right on the money.
Yeah, somebody called it an esoteric blasphemy, which I really loved.
You know, call it something else. Like, why call it Judy? I don't know. Why are you calling it?
Yeah, big time. Well, what I love about this is, you know, the worst part of it all was when they took her out, and what did they do, Olivia? They had her do her own photo shoot. I'm having a great time.
Like,
Gigi, you gotta love that.
She was like, and then she like did this bizarre wink, and I was just like,
oh,
what are we doing though? What are we, you know, it's very Fomorian.
It is. Now we've gone right into the Fomorian. Your take on the transhumanism, the phase that we're in, though, definitely we're facing something that the Atlanteans, you know, it's very interesting. There's a very unusual thread in the Casey readings, and it's alluded to in the Steiner work. And it has to do with the fact that the Atlanteans had these things. And the things were automatons. And this was the term that they used basically in this period of time, like the 20s and 30s and 40s, for robots. And now some of these things, there are all these stories about timekeepers for the things. And the Untouchables was another version of this. And he did talk about those who had, you know, in some ways embedded themselves with actual animal characteristics. There are some readings like that. But then there are some references that almost make it sound like they did try these cloning experiments. So it is almost like we're facing that entire mistake of Atlantis all over again, not just with the like, hey, we have atomic bombs, and that's like the 2i crystal pretty much, but this whole idea of the things and how they use the things as slaves and basically degenerated in their own character themselves. Gigi, this is a replay. It's not original. It's not new.
It's not original. It's not new. It's the same dance to a little bit of a different tune, the same dance and a little bit of a different density, you know, and we have to pass through the initiation that we didn't get. And, you know, so that's what we're doing. And, you know, Mars had a lot of problems with AI, and it had a lot of problems with that. And that was sort of one of the previous influences on the planet. And so that was part of the group that is kind of connected with that. They had a lot of issues with that on the planet, and it was part of the failure of that sphere, or a failure of that. That's what it represents, and that's one of the spheres that is battling. It really interestingly, I wanted to tell you this, but I completely forgot until now, but Kennedy used to talk about going to Venus, really interestingly, or used to mention Venus, and one of his daughter's code names was Venus, and then now some other groups really talk about going to Mars. So,
oh, interesting point. Yes.
You did that whole presentation. You and Olivia did that whole thing about that guy, the Mars guy. So it's really interesting how you can see the spheres come up, even though they're not outright saying it, but they're talking about the spheres, right? The Steiner spheres, or however you want to look at it. And they do talk about them. They want to go to Mars. Well, why do you want to go to specifically that one? Because
wow, absolutely, yeah. And what's amazing is in Steiner's work, I think one of the largest contributions of anthroposophy is the whole concept and notion of the eighth sphere, and how that was, you know, that was let loose basically as an accident by A.P. Sinnott, who was a theosophical writer, and Steiner came forward and said that's the biggest secret of the mystery schools, and he let it out backwards basically. And this is what it really represents, which is the eighth sphere is not the way it's portrayed, but the idea was that it was a false evolutionary step for souls out of planet Earth, and that they would become trapped while they were here. And most of the things that he talks about, as very often in Steiner's material, sound like they're looking right at this period, because it seemed like he was talking about virtual reality. And what he said was that Ahriman will give everyone their own sense of clairvoyance. So virtual reality basically feels a lot like that. And the more that they teach the machines to read our reactions and the rest, that's kind of going to be clairvoyant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And even the Tuatha myth talks about killing the octopus. That is kind of like the eighth sphere to me. It's almost like code. You know, the spider, the octopus. It's a sphere with 8 little legs. It's an eighth sphere to me.
Good point. It is, absolutely.
So that's really interesting too. So you see, even in previous times, there's still that connection, that initiation that we're trying to pass this time, and we're always moving closer and closer to that. You know, these battles with that are really with ourselves, but.
Absolutely. Wow. And this is the great thing about doing work with you on anything, because of course you sent me a message when we were talking about this, and I just looked up and it said banish the octopus ? I was like, I'm gonna write that down, banish the octopus. Miss Olivia.
It's weird, yeah.
I wanted to ask right away, so what is this initiation?
Wait, first banish the octopus.
Okay. I see a t-shirt in that. Okay, so anyway, so what is the test that we're up against right now, Gigi?
Yeah, so the test in a nutshell, I would say, is to move into the heart.
Okay.
That's what I would say. The heart is the balancing point of the mind and the emotions. It's the center point. It's the seal that we're on. And when we use that, it creates specific portals and perspectives in our being. And that's what I would, just really quickly, that's what I would say that it is. We are constantly being polarized into too much mind, too much distraction, or too much emotion. And we need to find that center place, which we know it to be as the heart. And so that's the initiation that we're trying to get. It's like 0 point, or it's balance. And it's not a Hallmark card or a sentimental thing. It's an actual esoteric position that you take to do work or to live from.
There's no question. I also like what you're saying, which is our attitudes themselves influence the political conditions, and even influence, according to the mystery schools, influence things like weather and earthquake activity and all the rest.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And sunspots.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's quite unusual.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to jump in about this heart thing, because I've been thinking so much this week about the trauma of what happened in France, and how I think we've talked about this quite a bit, about being all human life on the planet now is pretty traumatized over and over again. And trauma takes you out of your heart. It puts you into your mind. And it takes a lot of effort to recenter yourself back into your heart. So is this what the powers that be are doing? Is that they intentionally traumatize us again and again, so we cannot find our center, because our center is about empowerment in our heart? And
that's Notre Dame and the cathedral that went up in flames there. There's a lot of mystery school implications for that, but Gigi, go ahead.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with Olivia. I think that that's exactly what it does. It keeps you in your head, where you're constantly analyzing, trying to understand why something happened or what's going on, and then it shoots you right down into your survival chakra, where you're bypassing the heart both ways. You're trying to control through understanding and through knowing, and then you're going right down into that root chakra that's all about surviving, and you're not opening up, you're just clamping down. And so you're constantly oscillating everywhere but the center of your being. And if we did learn to kind of rest in our heart, we would see truth. And that's what the heart has to offer.
That's fascinating. We'll certainly get into this pattern that's been going on about the desecration of sacred sites. It's been a very unusual pattern, as has the pattern of these strange streaking fireballs showing up all over the place, in particular in the hot zone. One actually crashed into the western tip of Cuba about 4 weeks ago. These things are showing up everywhere. It's quite an unusual pattern. But staying on topic, there's a couple of things I wanted to get to in relation to the Tuatha de Danann and Sykes and what he was referring to. And this is particularly interesting to me, which is when he talks about this island, which is identified over and over again in these Celtic myths, and that the Druidic lore incorporates. And this is Mirius. And Mirius, according to him, was Bimini. And Bimini, of course, being spotlighted by Casey as where the Temple of Poseidon was rising, gives us this idea that Bimini is very important in the scheme of this. And I keep wondering, what was it that Bimini was all about? One of the things that Sykes pointed out, which I find interesting, is that in this part, in Bimini, that they had in those stories these crystal temples, and that the priestesses who were doing the healing there, they only had women who were doing these. And interestingly enough, in Casey's work, when he talks about dealing with the two-eye stone and interacting with these beings from the outer spheres, they also are only women. So what is it about priestesses there that's going on interrelating with the two-eye stone that it is strictly a feminine interaction?
Yeah, well, I think that how I would view it is women have a lot of lunar abilities, and a lunar psychic ability is a subtle ability that deals with emotions and thoughts, and compared to a solar psychic ability, which is like directly seeing or directly hearing. Lunar abilities aren't rooted in 3D reality. They're actually just outside of it. They're kind of more subtle. And those are the traveling abilities. They allow you to become something different. They allow you to enmesh with other worlds, and they allow the enmeshing of the intuitive or the woman. And the woman enmeshes with her child as well. So women enmesh. And that's really, really important, typically more than men do. But when men are psychic, it's really, 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 really good. I don't know if anyone's noticed that, but if you can get a man who's really psychic, they're just phenomenal, because they just are. But the solar abilities tend to be more grounded in 3D. It's a sight, it's a sound, it's referencing our 3D reality. But the subtle abilities allow you to completely change yourself and enmesh, and that's what you need when you're working cosmically, is you need to allow yourself to be something different or someone. You have to let yourself go. It's selfless. You got to let yourself go. You can't be exactly you anymore. And that is what I think one of the power of women, it's the power of water to change states. You know, you go from a solid, liquid, gas, and, you know, the cauldron, the chalice, it's that specific ability to change, to shift, to enmesh. That's what I think and the crystal acts as, you know, kind of that X, or that thing that allows you to triangulate, accentuate, and use your ability.
Do you, yeah, that's, you know, if you think about it, really, there is something that is inherently intuitive about women. And, but I have found this very interesting because, of course, you know, you have male initiates, and you have these male-only mystery schools that Blavatsky tried to get into, and it caused her to get into all these problems early in her career here in America. But it is very interesting whenever you get around these questions of Atlantis and the crystal pyramids and this whole legacy and the two-eye stone. On the spiritual side, it's all women.
They also, not everybody, but when you get to the high priestess level, so when you get to quite a high level of it, you can also emit. So you can emit your energy, you can impress your energy, and that's a very high level of initiation of feminine art and magic, is you actually get to impress your energy. So you could use a pyramid, or you can use different things, and you can actually change the energy in a room. You can change, and you can create an environment. You can actually create an environment for people to heal, for people to have memories, but you can actually, And this is actually the Venusian sphere is very good with this, of training those initiates on how to layer specific emotions within their being with specific thoughts to create very specific environments, to read energy and to create very specific environments. And that's what they'll do in rituals, is they'll create a very specific womb or cauldron or space. And it's done through technology, but they just emit it, and but you have to have your memory body activated to do that. So you have to remember your lives, you have to remember who you are. So you have to be awakened to do that, to do that level. But it's a feminine thing. It's not a masculine thing. It's a feminine thing to do that.
Wow. And for you students of anthroposophy out there, and to see how Steiner came down on this issue, what he said actually was that, and this is funny because you were talking about etheric bodies earlier and how that makes a big, when we're talking about the succession of the Tuatha de Danann and how they would choose them, and you said it would have to do with activating their etheric body and if they had those capabilities. Well, it's interesting because Steiner says in terms of men versus women on the etheric level that men fell more. So the fall aspect, falling into materiality, that women maintained a certain level etherically that didn't fall as much as men did into that 3D core reality. So that lines up exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. And well, somebody has to create birth, and someone has to be a little bit closer to be that ladder. So
right.
I feel like there's different times for different intuitives. Like a Steiner, I mean, the information, he may not be changing the room, maybe he is, but like male intuitives, there's a place for them too. Male teams are phenomenal.
No question about it.
Leadership and clarity. There's some things that we can't. It's special too.
Let me tell you, I've been studying Steiner for decades. It still seems like we're dealing with about 5 different people. It's incredible when you think about it. And I have one quick thing I wanted to ask you about this. It's kind of controversial. I'm going to ask you to weigh in esoterically anyway, which is we've seen all these things for gender X that they've been pushing. They made it a rule, an actual law on the birth certificate in New York that this would be the case. Now, I've spoken to Catherine Austin Fitz about it, and what she told me actually, and I looked into this, it was fascinating, which is that they're preparing the way to give robots rights because they want to protect their property when they roll out these robots to do all this stuff and take all these jobs, and they figure, oh, humans are going to blow them up, so we have to give them rights so that if you do something to a robot, it would be like doing it to a person, not just a piece of property. So that was one angle on the gender X thing that made sense. And I know some trans people are very upset being dragged into these political arguments and all this kind of stuff, and I don't blame them. I feel like these groups, like the state of New York, are exploiting these choices that they're making. But anyway, does this, what you were just talking about with the female aspect, is gender X a way to repress that female memory, that female coming into full fruition by blurring it and saying, well, you're not really any particular gender, you're just a blurred gender?
That's really interesting. I didn't realize the rights thing, but that's really terrifying. I think it could be. I don't think the question is it okay to be transgender or gay or anything? Of course, that's okay. You be who you are and you be the best, you can be. Like that's it. End of story.
Right.
I do think that we have to realize that there is no person that is off limits to exploitation. There is no person that's going to be, off limits. And these groups will choose the most sensitive people in society and exploit them. And exploit their issues, that. So we can't just think they wouldn't do that. They absolutely would. And understanding ourselves and understanding our gender is really important. And so you don't want to have pole shifts, essentially internal pole shifts and things like that. So that's also why the heart is so significant, because that's also where your identity is, where your true identity is, so.
Wow, fascinating. Absolutely, 100% agree. very strange agenda working there. But just like the conversations I've had with Dr. Farrell in relation to true transhumanism and what they're pushing, if you look at that kind of Middle Ages template for the Tree of Life, they were moving, their big goal was to move from animal to mineral and to short circuit this process of going up the regular spiritual ladder. What I find interesting about that is that mineral, of course, the next level would be projecting your consciousness into a cyborg, which people like Kurzweil think you're going to be able to do. They can just project their consciousness into this immortal cyborg and they'll be fine, forgetting about the pineal gland and these the chakra system and all the rest of it, as if that just didn't exist and don't need it. So that sounds very much like an eighth sphere scenario. What's fascinating about it is when you get people like Elon Musk, who used to be really anti-AI, talking about it and saying, oh, it'd be great to just project my consciousness into a cube. This is where this process is leading, because these people who study these things, like Kurzweil and his ilk, that type of scientist, very aware of the esoteric side. And the next level up in the Tree of Life is mineral. So they figure, hey, if I'm in a cyborg, I'm mineral. I'm up the next level without going through this actual process of the spiritual development.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And what's really interesting is is that the Tuatha are a mineral too.
Yes.
And it's sort of like, that you can see that there's a sacred aspect to it, but then you can also see that someone really isn't getting it.
Right, exactly.
They just don't get it. So, but I think that there's a lot of people that are afraid to die. And there's a lot of people that are afraid.
Excellent point. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
They're afraid to die.
Yeah, but they also are embracing this idea that, I'm immortal physically. This is it. Everything's physical.
Yeah,
and
no.
I can be dominant physical.
Physical is the tip of the iceberg. And you can't stop, that's completely, whatever they've been channeling is lying to them. So
wow, great point. Miss Olivia.
Well, I mean, I always try to get things down to the most basic level, and this is about control, right? This is not about flowing with the force. This isn't about allowing. This isn't about because you need humility for that, right? This is about control, which is about fear, right? And so the people who are the most controlling, the billionaires in our society, as far as I can see, are the most terrified, right? And then we live in their world because they are the great influencers. And this is why our world is so terrifying, is because they themselves are terrified, because there's no trust in a deity, in anything beyond themselves. The only thing they know is scientific materialism, right? Death and taxes.
Right.
And that's it. That's the extent of life. So this is why we have the world we have.
This is an harmonic culture. And this is why the mystery schools supported anthroposophy. Give us some information to work against this particular aspect of scientific materialism. But Gigi, fear, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean they're completely ruled by it. And I completely agree with what it's like a horrible way to live. I mean, it's so weak. I'm sorry, but it's so weak. I mean, if you have to create that many safeguards and you're living that way, I mean.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So much for power.
Yeah, you're surrounded by nature. You're surrounded by light. You're surrounded by it. You are it. And you're fighting it the whole way. Sad.
I really want you to have that specific course out there for people who are walking around just buried in their phones and Olivia and I saw somebody actually kind of, walk into another person doing this. And it's correct. I mean, it's funny because in Gurdjieff's period, when he's talking about people becoming mechanical, they didn't even have television yet, but boy, did he foresee what was coming down the pipe. And it's amazing the the level that we're on, the lack of consciousness, every time, you know, I'm out driving, there is that car right there at the light that won't move because they're still texting away and all the rest of it, you know, to hell with reality or whatever. There are all these other cars behind you. The consciousness level has just gone down dramatically as a result.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think, yeah. And I think that the timing of wars and crises all play into it, because it's like people would rather stare at their phone and be eternally distracted than deal with their ancestral wounds, their childhood, and things like that. So it all is part of the working machine of the shadow of society. So
yeah, there's no question about it. It's an amazing period, but we've been given this track, basically, this kind of setup for it, and to give us some indication that it was coming down the pike. And this is the mystery school effort. The question is, can this society, can this early 21st century American society take the message of the mystery schools?
yeah, absolutely. It's your message. It's
Yes.
your message. It's your history. It's your life. It's your capacity. There are people who have obviously kept it, but it's yours. And it's just about remembering this and realizing it. And I think that we're on that page. I mean, I look at YouTube and I see the most amazing conversations going on.
Yes.
And I know that it's a struggle and I know that it's a fight, but it has to be in a way. You know,
they're putting tags on your video saying, by the way, alien abduction, here's the Wikipedia Encyclopedia Britannica version of alien stuff, just in case you trust Gigi Young and her version of it.
well, thanks. Like, yeah, exactly. And I mean, but the more that they tighten their grip, the more they expose themselves, because people are just going to start being like, why are you doing that? And people are starting to do that. And they've really created a bit of a monster, a good monster in a way, with the internet and YouTube, because it's picking up. I mean, they're trying to tamp down on it, but there are so many important discussions out there for people who want to wake up more than ever, you know. So we do have a lot going for us.
Absolutely, no question. On I did a documentary 4 years ago on JFK, Agent Oswald, and now they've got this big thing on there, and they're like, before you watch this, Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy from a building when he just happened to be going by, and his rifle just happened to kill all the participants involved.
Right, and this is Censorship Light.
Yeah,
right.
right. This
is the mid stuff.
They haven't even got to the good stuff yet.
No, they're waiting for. Yeah, that's right. It is Censorship Light, and they're watching to see how we respond and how angry we get, and yeah.
Can they contain it? Yeah, can they contain it?
Yeah.
I made the observation that I think that they are starting to go crazy in a sense, and that they're losing perspective, because they've put out so much disinformation that now it's echoing back to them. They're having dissonance themselves, and they're on a kind of a crazy perch. We were watching something that was Zuckerberg giving testimony, and they were just asking him, well, you know, how do you feel about shutting down all these accounts? And some of the accounts were just about, like, you know, how to collect rainwater and stuff like that. And he said, well, you know, I don't think that speech, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it exactly, but I think you get the gist of it. You know, I don't think that free speech is really protected in the 21st century. You have to have different ways to kind of massage it, you know. It's not the way to go. So basically saying that in terms of these corporations, which large swaths of the culture are on using these platforms, that they don't believe in free speech, which is in the Constitution, which is in the country that they reside in, that gives them the ability to create the company in the first place. So we've gone now outside of the rules of the Constitution. So when we look at it that way, I mean, it's quite an interesting state of mind that they're drifting into and thinking, hey, you know, we're just going to go further and further and become bigger and bigger technocratic dictators.
Well, they're blinded by their own arrogance, and I think that's what we're really seeing is they're incredibly arrogant. And even in that little, you tweeted it a while ago, it was about the TTSA. It was like a 10-year timeline for the TTSA. They couldn't even keep the story straight, or
That was amazing.
it wasn't the TTSA, it was another group. I can't remember what it was, like APIC or something, or whatever it was.
Yes.
They couldn't even keep their story straight. And there's like, it was just one group with one message that, you know, it's a threat or whatever it was. They couldn't keep it, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's when you're being a liar.
Yes. Well, no, this is it, right? You have to be, basically, when you're lying, it's hard to keep a good track down. And when you have Luis Elizondo at the head of TTSA, which is Tom DeLonge's CIA disclosure thing, and Elizondo isn't confirmed, now absolutely confirmed, senior counterintelligence CIA officer who worked for John Brennan. How could you ever get any kind of disclosure? The History Channel has his programs called Unidentified, the American Search for UFOs or whatever. I mean, you know, that's the level that you're gone on, that a CIA officer is the one who's supposed to be out there getting UFO truth. I mean, isn't that exactly the group that suppressed the truth about these things? So we're getting into really narrative trouble here, where they're just trying to control these narratives. But on the surface, for people who know anything about it or knew any of the players over the course of time, it looks ridiculous because, you know, aside from impressing some people by having some money behind a UFO thing, you know, basically this is ridiculous. It's saying that the CIA is going to give you UFO disclosure because they're so angry at what? At the government who repressed it? They are the government who repressed it. So it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And it's like they realize that they need to get in on the pie.
Yes.
So they're trying. They realize that they're being forced to, but because they don't understand it themselves, they don't really understand it themselves, they're having difficulty getting in there and predicting what people want and predicting what people need as well. They're doing it with YouTube by having YouTubers that are apparently experiencers and trying to get the younger demographic and things like that too, because they realize YouTube is so big. But also that's falling flat because they haven't experienced. And people who have experience can tell the difference. And so there's a real slip going on, and it's going to be really interesting to observe, you know, how it evolves on, you know, so many different levels.
How dangerous is it, Gigi?
I think that it's very dangerous, especially for people who are in their awakening process, and it's like a hypnagogic state where they're kind of like, they've had experiences and they believe in ETs, but they don't have the discernment yet because their whole world's been turned upside down and everything they believe to be true is no longer true. So you can really get hooked into things because you just found out that everything was a lie or Lot was a lie. Very vulnerable. So it's that group that I'm concerned about the most. But there's a lot of people, I see it in my work all the time, that are pretty awake. And there's a lot of those people too. So hopefully we'll see.
No question about it. I am also finding people in more and more situations in daily life being aware of these issues. And it's quite remarkable.
Your new bank that you went to.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of fascinating when you think about it. Now, the theme of the program is Atlantis Rising. Let's think about this for a minute, because all these issues are interconnected. But if, as the mystery schools and Casey suggested, there is land rising, actual land rising off the east coast of America, and that land is going to reveal a forgotten culture, which we've already seen through the work of Zalitsky. It's there. You know, it's undeniable. The Bimini Wall is undeniable. What does that impact have if that becomes widespread knowledge? What does that do to the individual psyche of society in the 21st century?
I think it's gonna create a real point of vulnerability where I think that some people could really fall into certain narratives and there could be certain narratives spun with that. But then some people, and this is the I think the thing that people have difficulty mitigating, is that people could also start remembering remembering lives, or just remembering technologies psychically as well. They could have like, oh, this is so weird, I feel like I've been here. That's dangerous to elite people. That's dangerous to people who don't want people to remember. But there's also a vulnerability, because people are going to suddenly question everything, and they could also be led astray. So there's a couple different dynamics, I think, that could come into play with it.
Fascinating. I think it has a lot of power for sure. And but again, you make the great point, which is there's a danger involved when it goes down, because they're going to try to control that moment. Because if we happen to get that, we're talking about people who in the 60s and 70s, like John Lennon and the Hemingways, as we pointed out in a number of shows together, understood this principle, understood that this was going to happen, even try to buy lots in the Atlantic Ocean for where those land masses would rise. So there's definitely, if there's something operative in the human unconscious about this, and they've done a really good job, even of keeping people like Egerton, Sykes way in the background. Although when you look at it, if you're a researcher, if you do reports like I do, I'll say that better than Berlitz, better than other people who've looked at Atlantis, Egerton Sykes had the best scientists. He had the background as an intelligence officer. He had the stories about the geopolitics going on there. I find it quite fascinating, because I think we're in a position where actually Atlantis Rising becomes something that is the great important thing that's about to be unlocked, and the culture really isn't ready for it.
Yes, I think but part of me also thinks that like they're as ready maybe as they're gonna
Right.
be. But yeah, it's gonna be a breaking point. It's fun.
I should say they're not ready for it because the information's been suppressed.
Yes,
Mystical
exactly.
Tools let it out. Casey let it out. Steiner let it out. Sykes let it out.
It's
But,
out there. It's out there in so many different ways. And people just, and I think this is the thing, is that people just didn't know they could ask the question. And that's the whole thing, is I think people would be interested, but so much of accessing our history and accessing whether it be personal or collective is you have to have the right questions. And so many people don't even realize that the question even exists. And so I think it's just putting the question out there that's really important. Just getting to play with it is really important.
Fascinating. Everyone, we're here with Gigi Young. We're in X episode 53, going deep into the hot zone and all of the social pressures and geopolitical pressures that are coming to bear here, that we're seeing so much in the beginning of the spring, which is just off the charts. Now, we're going to be taking your questions here with Olivia. Ask them all in caps. Miss Olivia, I should check in with you.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing?
I am doing great.
Okay.
Lots of good questions.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and jump right in?
Okay, well, let's just do this one. Nancy Miller wanted to know, what does Steiner say about the Tuatha de Danann? And Alex Berger wanted to know, do the Tuatha de Danann have an impact on today's society?
I'll take the first one, but Gigi's going to take the second one.
Okay.
Well, here's a real quick, easy answer for Steiner. Steiner, look at the work that Steiner did around Manu. Manu was the most advanced initiate in Atlantis, and he resided in and went to Ireland. And when he was in Ireland, he basically tried to figure out, from the destruction of Atlantis that was happening, who were the best initiates that were left. And he took them all, and he left with them and went to India. So, and Manu, there's a great tradition of Manu in India. But there's no question that Ireland, the initiates, and Manu and Steiner all show up, and that's all Tuatha de Danann information. So Steiner's work definitely supports the theory that the Tua were Atlantean. Now, Gigi, the other one for you was the Tuatha de Danann now. How do they affect things now?
Yeah, I think they affect things in a lot of ways. I think that they live on in people who have had incarnations as them. I think they live on genetically. And I believe that they also communicate with people psychically. And so they're very much a part of things. And they're very much here. And they just communicate in all these different ways. So they're still here. But they function differently, I think, than some other groups would. So I don't think it's always as obvious.
Well, it's fascinating that you mentioned it that way, because one of the things I wanted to include in this episode, we're doing an episode, or putting one together, I should say, on the Dropa stones, which are these incredible stones that were discovered, and no one's been able to quite figure out what they're all about. But in the middle of all that research, I came across research on the Nebra Disk, and you and I, Gigi, have done some back and forth on it, and you've had some ability to tune in. I want to show everyone what it is, and then I just want you to talk about it briefly, and then we'll launch into questions. If that sounds good, Olivia, if that works for you. Now, the Nebra stone was discovered in very unusual circumstances in 1999 by an archaeological group, and it was discovered in Europe, and it also is unusual in how advanced the astrology on it was, but also the unusual properties it would give up over time that are only now being brought to bear. Let's take a quick look at it. This is the Nebra stone, and I have to tell you, in my own looking into this, I am tying the Nebra work directly into the Tuatha de Danann, the same way that we're tying the tribe of Dan into them. And there is a reason for that. But let's first look at the stone and how unusual it is. Here are a few key points about it, Gigi, and then I'm going to ask you for your input. One, people have done these types of astrological sort of interpretations on what the information there really is. That's one. What I find particularly fascinating about it is in this one, it shows that it has Orion's belt, Aldebaran, Aries, Sirius, that it is a complete chart of the cosmos from a period 5300 BC when there's not supposed to be anything of the like about it. There it is. And I highly recommend looking into this. We're going to bring it up again when we cover the Dropa stones coming up. But obviously an incredibly advanced astrological astronomy chart here that we're looking at from the group who produced it. Now, they found out some other very interesting things that relate very tightly with the X Steganography, which is that the angles are very unusual on the disk itself and correspond directly to this X progression. The X, what they found when they looked deeply into it, doing it with degrees, etc., was that it covered both ends of the solstices from both angles, and that was the X formation that they got. The X steganography was embedded inside the Nebra stone. What they also found as they got further into it was that although it was showing certain things on the surface, when they went beneath it, when they X-rayed it, they found other things also that related to what were apparently astronomical aspects that we're not aware of. So Gigi, with everyone keeping this Nebra discovery in mind, and I do promise everyone we're going to go deep into it, since I have you here, Gigi, and I know we've tuned into it a little bit, tell me about the Nebra stone and its significance and its possible connection to the Tuatha de Danann.
Well, for me, when the first thing that I felt when I looked at it was that it was actually commemorating a portal, or commemorating a ceremonial portal and a ritual. That was like, oh, that's what that is.
Wow! Wow! Incredible.
And I actually think that that's why there are different sizes as well. It's talking about different densities there. people are like, well, why is that so big and what's happening there? And I think it's actually talking about different, I think it's trying to depict an action going on, a shift in density. As we mentioned earlier, you have Lepus, you have the hair, which is obviously at his feet. I think, is it at his feet? Orion's feet? That's his boat, or his little thing, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
And there's a lot
to remind everyone, that's the whole three hairs dance there that we covered so well, which is also unexplained, and no one seems to know where it comes from, but it's throughout all these different cultures, from Iran to China to Egypt. And one of the things that Gigi noticed about this one, and this was really good observation, is that it relates to Steiner's switch of Mercury with Venus, because in the middle of this one, as you can see, there's actually a symbol for Mercury there, and this is the, quote, hunt of Venus going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
While you're on that for a second, a cult fan wanted to know, does the switch of Mercury and Venus represent a pole shift?
Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, actually, it seems like it's an intentional switch of information so that something can't be followed there, Gigi, so that the work of the mystery schools can continue unimpeded.
Because things went underground.
Exactly. So, right.
I think things went underground. A lot of things, I think, went underground in order to preserve certain things that were going to be necessary in the future. And so that's what that has to do with, certain pathways. And that connects in with the disc. And, it has Osiris's dog, or Orion's dog, or the dog hair. The dog is chasing the hair.
Yes.
And the Egyptians talk about this a lot as well, and they commemorate this as well. And it's a specific portal. It is a very special time for a certain group, and it's a specific portal that was opened, and it's something that was protected, which is what the shift obviously is about. But it's a certain time, a particular time, according to a certain group.
Well, if we're going to get to that in 1 second,
okay.
Olivia, but I have one question for you, Gigi. We're definitely going to have you back to go deep on the Dropa stones and this Nebra Disk. So we don't have to answer all the questions now, but I just want to get this one in, which is on the disk, like you mentioned, there's lapis, which gives us a hint of the Tuatha de Danann in relation to this disk, which is unusual. And we know that they're this advanced group floating around there doing things like showing up in the Bible and all the rest of it. But the Nebra stone has some other quality, which they just discovered, and this is a major news story, which is that the tin that's involved in some of the design comes from a part of England that's close to Stonehenge. And this association with the UK now getting closer to where the Tuatha were in Ireland. What is it about the disc? Is it something that was passed around? You said it commemorated a portal. It's very unique. I think it's unique for us to have it. But what is it about the disc that you would have elements like lapis and tin from the UK involved in it, when it was certainly far away in Southeastern Europe?
Yeah, so when something is created ritualistically, everything is considered. So the material is considered, and it has to represent perhaps the past, perhaps certain things that are important, and it's forged in a certain way. So it wouldn't just be, kind of one-dimensional, where it's like, oh, well, here's the sky at a particular time that a ritual was done to bring in certain energy or something like that. It would also incorporate the very material itself that would help make it just that much more powerful. And it has to be complete. And so that's why the materials are from certain places, and that's the intention, behind it.
That's absolutely fascinating, because we talked about a bunch of unusual things relating to the date of your birthday, and some weird synchronicities that came up this year in relation to that. One of the fascinating things that I found out about this stone is that on April 16th, there was a group of researchers who said what it was doing was predicting actually an eclipse that was coming up in April 16th in 1500 BC. And I thought, how unusual is that we're getting around to this date just as we're doing this one?
That is just bizarre.
Yes.
That's just unusual and very weird. That's weird.
Straight up.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Fascinating. Miss Olivia.
Walter Bosley, who's in the chat, said
Walter.
maybe it's the portal through which the Tuatha entered our dimension.
Whoa, now you're talking. Walter's done some good work on the Tuatha, and I look forward to him doing more on that. What do you think of that, Gigi?
I love that. I think that's an amazing observation. I think that that's something that people would want to commemorate and leave behind. Absolutely. The beginning of something or the rebirth of something. Absolutely. I think that's a great observation.
Walter, I wanted to mention that I'm finally getting around to Esoteric Napoleon, and it is great. And I want everyone to pick up this book. We're going to have Walter on talking about it in a couple of weeks. And but this is something else. Moving into the new studio, a bunch of books came up, and I've been racing through the books as I've been moving into the studio. And that one finally I got to the radar. But wow, an incredible piece of work, and relates so strongly to the work. The things that we're doing here at the X Steganography. That's interesting, Gigi. The X Steganography part, you said something when you were looking at these different aspects, and you said what the X represented in terms of density. I wonder if I can get you to kind of recount that.
Yeah. Well,
the present time aspect.
Yeah. The X is the presence. If you look at the X as a triskelion, or the typical Celtic 3, you have an X on the top, or like a thing on the top that's actually traversing the past on the bottom and the future on the bottom. And in our day and age, we have Janus, which is the past and the future, but at a higher density, we have the X included, and it is traversing the past and the future. And you choose, by being in the moment and having that presence in your body, you choose. You're not subject to time. Time is subject to you. And that's the magic in itself, the Trinity in itself. That's the magic there.
You're transcending at that point. That's a real, that's an interesting interpretation of the X. I think that you are really zooming into something with that, because when I looked at what they were doing with this and how researchers independently had come up with this X Steganography relating to the Nebra Disk, I was like, it's amazing, because that mystery school knowledge, the way that they were using the symbol, the steganography through time, when you really dig into it, you start to understand why they were using it in this fashion, how it was the perfect tool, because it could guide us through different things. You could use it for physics. You could use it, representing language. You could use it representing seasons. It was kind of this all-around perfect symbol. And when you got into the idea that it's in the present moment, transcendent of time, that I think is a really fascinating interpretation.
Yeah, and it is, even the look of it, even the look of an X is 2 V's with a center. So even the look of it is like 2 portals, or two things coming together at a point. So it's kind of like an X within an X within an X, almost.
Right, absolutely.
It's getting weird now, but.
Can you imagine my excitement at seeing just, getting into the Nebra Disk and then seeing that? I was like,
it's such a confirmation that you're on the right track, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Miss Olivia.
Are you ready for questions?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're going to go for it. So Lechat wanted to ask, are the Stonehenge stones of a different resonance than stones in other mythical places on Earth? I once heard something that, like, photographs showed that the stones are translucent. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Stonehenge, Gigi.
You know what? I believe one of the magical elements of Stonehenge is that they're imbued with an energy. And so it's amazing what we can imprint on things and on each other. And I think that when things become imprinted with energy, they can photograph differently and things like that. It's very possible that the stones themselves are special and things like that. But I also think it's part of it is consciousness as well.
Absolutely, no question about it. I want to mention something in relation to Stonehenge and the Georgia Guidestones, which is there's deep research that both monuments are set up on an X grid. And, you know, Stonehenge and its incredible commemoration in the mystery of it, commemoration of seasons and all the rest, they say it's a calendar, no question about it, but it's something much deeper in the grand scheme of things than just a calendar. They love to just say, hey, they had the calendars down. The pyramid was a calendar. Stonehenge is a calendar. It's going a lot deeper, but absolutely fascinating. In terms of the rock that was used, what I think is interesting is no one understands how you get rock from so far away with the kind of tools that they had, since they don't even give cultures like the Inca credit for the wheel. So the model that we have for archaeology has to be thrown out. Egyptology's model largely came about in the 17th century and the 18th century. So, you know, we've come a long way. We can X-ray things, we have satellites and all the rest of it, but they still have the king's progression that goes up to a certain dynasty, and that's what they rely on. But they got that information through what were basically like, you know, bear skins and knives and stuff. I mean, I think we could do better than that now, but they're so institutionalized that although we have the advanced technology, they don't want to move this kind of establishment version of things like Darwinism. You know, there's a way to move now beyond this stuff, but they're entrenched. They've become the logic of this. So we have to put up with the absurd notion that the Inca and the Maya don't have the wheel. So how do you get Stonehenge and those tremendous blocks weighing many tons? This is a question for Graham Hancock, I'm sure. You know, how do you get those stones all the way from one end of England to the other with using traditional methods of guys dragging it? It's not going to happen. So, and dragging it without a wheel, give that a try. So it's fascinating, Gigi. We live in a kind of a weird, advanced, backward setup in terms of our consciousness because of entrenched power.
Yeah, we really do. I think part of it on like a higher level, because we have to have the higher level to let it go, is that it's having us formulate the right questions. And it's having us do a lot of inner work as to why we would ever want to forget and things like that. So there is a purpose for us not knowing. But there's just no way around it that we're selling ourselves short, and that we're not being told everything. There's just no way around that. But, you know, a lot of researchers and scientists do talk about sound, and they do talk about certain things that can be done. So it's not like it's not in the public. It's just people aren't asking the right questions.
Absolutely. It's not the accepted narrative. That's a great point. And Gigi, you've been very quotable tonight. I think we could pull out quite a few quotes from you this evening. Miss Olivia.
Christine Taggart. Is there
Christine.
there a symbiotic relationship between the Tuatha stone and humanity, especially if the Tuatha is a living being? The Tuatha stone is resonating energy. Now, do we affect it more than it affects us?
Gigi, you brought up that the Tuatha was living. I found that very fascinating. It puts a whole different shade on this in terms of just thinking of it as a technology versus something that's conscious. What do you think of a question like that?
Yeah, hi, Christine. And I feel like you're talking about it like you know about it.
Right.
I feel like you're speaking intuitively, and I feel like you're speaking something that is true because you know that it's true. And I would follow that intuition, and I would agree with you. Everything that I've seen with the Tuatha is that it was created in layers, actually. And these layers represent different periods of time and different also aspects of humanity. And so it contains all of that. and specifically at a certain level. And I believe that it's pulling us up. And so there's kind of different things, like, you know, as with Casey's 2i, there's smaller ones, there's bigger ones. There's an esoteric personality of the 2i, a higher dimensional personality of the 2i. And then there's other things. So there's lots of different ways to look at it, but I think that you really have nailed the personality there, and I think that you understand something there.
Excellent point. And that Firestone, the portable 2i that people used to walk around with, it's pretty interesting because, you know, the way he describes it, it almost sounds like it could be like an iPhone, drawing on the main power center. Absolutely fascinating. Miss Olivia.
I'm going to stay on the 2i stone for a little while. Celtic Dove was asking, is the 2i stone an off-world object, as in Tektite/meteorite?
Wow.
I don't feel that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to pretend to know everything at all, but in every impression that I've got, it's definitely not off-world. From what I've seen, it's for the Earth, was created by the Earth or by certain groups that were using the Earth as a medium, and it wasn't brought here. We have an issue with thinking that anything that's wonderful or anything that's great is where that we're kind of children and it's given to us and then we have it, and I think that's kind of, it's almost like our way of dealing with our own forgetting. We're trying to fit something into our kind of forgetfulness, and I think that it was no. I'm just gonna go with it's organic. It's organic, and it has to be. It has to be to have the power that it has. You can't really take an off-world organic item like a crystal and have the same power and effect and the ability for the crystal to do exactly what it can do. It has to be something that is organic, and it has to come from a certain place and be created in a certain way over time, you know, and there's a ceremony within. So it has to be Earth to have the effect on the Earth. It has to be of the Earth to do that. So.
Well, this is fascinating because let's remind everyone what Casey has said about the 2i stone, which is that the 2i stone is what the Atlanteans used to power the culture, the same way that we use, you know, oil, atomic power, and electricity. It did everything, and it powered airplanes, it powered submarines, ships, cars, the whole bit. In their description, it was vehicles that glided along closely to the Earth. So I guess the cars wouldn't be exactly, but certainly there are all those references to flying, you know, to early flying machines. And Casey's basic impression of it was that it worked like a power station, that there'd be a central station and all these smaller stations around it would draw from the 2i crystal. And he actually described how they would do it. And it was interesting because a NASA scientist in 1974 developed it, you know, a model of it basically. And the top of it looked very much like the Star of David, which is very interesting because it had those 6 sides to it, and the way that Casey described it. But he also described a dome going over it. And many people thought, well, it just, you know, the sun went through the crystal and that's how it worked. But what he talked about was, he said those bodies that are on fire themselves. So he's talking about more than just the sun, but certainly that they were using the sun, but that this thing had the ability to regenerate people also, which regeneration is referred to often, that people would get to a certain age, they'd go into the temple, the 2i crystal would recharge them physically, mentally, they'd come out young again. So that's where so many of these stories, like the Fountain of Youth and so on, come from. So the 2i becomes a real, you know, and then eventually misused to cause the breakup of Atlantis. So we're talking about something which had an amazingly huge impact on the culture in that period, so much so that what we refer to now as like the Bermuda Triangle and things like that may still be the 2i stone in opposite operation, causing those types of magnetic effects. from this incredible apotheum effect that took place. So we really have to think about it in these terms to grasp the power of it. Casey gave 900 life readings, and close to half of them dealt with the Atlantean subject. And the two-eye stone was always in the heart of the culture of those people. So it was something day to day that they had access to. So this idea of understanding it and what it was, Gigi, when you go deep into it, we start to really get a sense of it, thinking of it not so much as a tool, but to start to get some idea of the character of what the thing is.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Casey said it was off-world or on-world, but I can understand why people would get the sense, because if you tune into Atlantis or even Lemuria or any of the lost times, it kind of does feel like another world. Like it doesn't feel like now. It doesn't feel like the Earth now. So in a way, it is kind of a little bit foreign to us that time. So I can completely understand why people would think, oh, this is a foreign thing, because we've gone through a density shift and things like that. So
that's so interesting. In Steiner's work, what he said in relation to that period is that humanity hovered in their ethereal body above their physical body. So they weren't closely knit in matter. They weren't fully inside of the physical self. So they were much more connected to nature and the cosmos and the rest of it. So what you're saying there is right on point. And Casey had an interesting quote in relation to this. He said that the consciousness of the person in that era was aware of what was happening in the sky above them a mile.
Oh, that means that the higher chakras were open then, because that's where that, yeah. So
wow, interesting, right?
Yeah, because they're sensing. Because if that's, yeah, you've got those keys open, so you're able to have your cosmic chakras open. You're also opening different levels in the Earth too, because the higher up you go, that's all changing. So yeah, that's really interesting. It definitely is a different way of life to have a crystal, generate everything, and you're generating the crystal. It's a type of symbiosis that I think we all dream of. And so
absolutely.
a little bit, it's kind of like foreign, but it is a time that we were engaged in. So
Gigi, you're aware of a mile up there. Don't fool me. Come on.
I don't know. I've never even thought of things that way. But as soon as someone said that, I was like, I got a vision of, because we have those higher chakras that we don't realize. Like, no one really talks about them, but they exist. And so when they were like reaching up a mile, I was like, that's what must be going on. It's the cosmic chakra system.
Wow, great point, Miss Olivia.
Oh my God, where do I go? Okay, Soul said, many Atlanteans are reincarnating now. They have many lessons to learn, and in particular, that of not recreating the mistakes they made back then. Scruples4444 says the real memories will return. And Ward Weinheimer says, does Gigi believe Atlanteans are still alive and aware of where they came from?
Lovely. I love the conversations going on in there. Everyone in the chat is so smart. I go back and look in the chat and I'm like, oh my God, they should be interviewed and talked about, because everybody, that's just brilliant.
Always.
Yeah, it's insane. Like,
that's why it's the ideas room. It's not chat.
It's like, I'm going to make a video on that with that, but I think it lives on in all of us unconsciously. I mean, really it does. I mean, I think we live in a collective shock, actually, since Atlantis fell. But it's so deep, like in our limbic system and in our being, that we can't even put a name on it because we don't remember it. But I think we're constantly reacting and responding to each other and repeating patterns that are based there, which is why we're generating our own initiation. And even what I find really interesting is in the New Age, people talk about Atlantis very poorly. Lemuria is this great, wonderful place, but Atlantis is a bad place. And so what that does is it makes us not want to connect with ourselves in that time. And in a way, it perpetuates, especially in the New Age, it perpetuates this fear of wanting to connect with ourselves there.
Yeah.
And so that...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of perpetuates that.
It's a bad rap.
Yeah, and it makes us not go inward to that place, even though we need to, because it's bad. And so we need to really look at it honestly that it's not bad, it's not good. It's part of what we need to move through.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here in X Series 53 on the Tuatha de Danann and Druids in the Hot Zone with Gigi Young, who is going deep into these subjects on Atlantis Rising with us, and how great it is to have Gigi look at these topics, because so many of the great mystics of the past dealing with the mystery schools left us a legacy around Atlantis that is very hard for us to get our hands on without getting that kind of psychic archaeology involved. And I want everyone to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter to keep us in touch, because we're really, looking at so many platforms just completely operating with arbitrary rules. And the best way for us to stay in touch, of course, is for you guys to be on that newsletter list. Also, with Gigi's work at gigiyoung.com, she's doing her second intuition course. Highly recommend this. This is really the kind of next level step. And how would you describe it, Gigi?
I would just say that the first one is for everybody. It's, kind of a more foundational beginner one. And the second one is about protection, like I said. And I would just say that it's for everyone to connect with their own intuition and their instinct. It really takes, everybody's intuitive, but it kind of takes you from going to a very rudimentary kind of instinctual way of living, like good, bad, to actually understanding why something is good or why something's bad or why you can't trust that person or what's coming forward. So it kind of evolves what you already have.
Bad Atlantis.
Bad Atlantis. Don't go back there.
I have a picture of Belial here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Here's Belial. So just so everyone understands that, yeah, Belial, he was tough to deal with. I mean,
is that really? Did someone really draw that? Is that really him?
Yeah, this is based on the whole biblical aspects, because the biblical Baal is based on the Belial story from Atlantis, but that is the drawing of the biblical Belial. And that really gives us an idea there of just a fallen Dark Lord who was ready to give us problems. Remember, I often show Steiner's Ahriman. I don't have that here, but I have the original Persian Ahriman. And I like to show this because what's interesting about this is they're supposed to be twins. And I always find that interesting because Ahura Mazda in Persian mythology is slaying Ahriman. But he's battling him, and he has to keep a sword in him while holding his horn, and he's still not. It's still a hard thing to keep up. And the Persians had this down, which is Ahura Mazda and Ahriman being twins, but Ahriman is dedicated completely to this kind of dark astral evil, and Ahura Mazda being almost like the Jesus figure in that. Here, their battle depicted again, I think, very strongly. And I've always found it fascinating that when Steiner went to develop the nomenclature for us to discuss this, he always used the term Ahriman when referring to these forces, and that comes directly out of Persian mythology. So it gives us some idea of the Atlantis side and how bad that was, because of course Ahriman got a tremendous foothold, and the Ahrimanic forces are what are known as the Belial forces. So that combination of factors leaves that echo. But there's no question about it. Emilius, who is kind of the Christ figure in Atlantis, is barely talked about much at all.
Yes.
Yeah. How about that, Miss Olivia?
I just wanted to say Orion Quest said what we need is integration. And that reminded me of what I woke up and have been thinking about all day, which is Casey's quote on that evil is just below good. Could you talk on that a little bit?
It's interesting. What Casey suggested was that evil was not the opposite of good, that it was just below it. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Gigi, about looking at things in black and white, that these are mirror aspects and that they are aspects to be faced and overcome. Just the mystery schools, in fact, invite the challenge of Ahriman. The idea is to be aware of it and to overcome it, not to run away from it, or the worst part would be to fall, asleep to it and have it sort of move in while people were unaware of it. That is what Ahriman apparently seeks over and over again, is the kind of sleep of humanity. And you have over and over again the mystery schools having that, like, wake up, become awake, waken out of your slumber. And then, but what we find in traditional society over and over again is this idea that people yell at you and they say, like, wake up, your country's being taken, wake up. And they're popping a vein up here. And of course, when you're in that kind of a state, you're not awake at all. If you're freaking out and just going to throw a chair through the window, and there's a time to be politically angry, don't get me wrong. But when you are in that kind of a state over and over again, we see these memes and stuff about wake up, wake up. So there's different kinds of waking up, I guess I would say, in relation to that.
Yeah, and that's like that righteous anger where it's like, yes, it's righteous, but it's still anger. It's still, and that's the whole thing, is it's
yes,
it's
a trap.
Yeah, it's like sometimes the line is really blurred, and people lie if they don't think that they've done evil, thinking that it was good, and that's when the most things. So it is just below, and in our dimensional sphere, and I think Steiner talks about it. I'm not exactly sure if it was Steiner, but you mentioned it, I think, on our last one, where Ahriman, or the darker forces, are actually above 3D. So they're in that higher density,
yes,
above us. So they're in our perception, there's that illusion there where we're not above that. It's actually something that's trickling down to us in the structure.
Absolutely. Excellent point.
So,
that's a great way to develop real consensus around it, because I think what happens is, it's like you were saying, me good, evil bad, and that's the kind of temptation. And this happens a lot in the independent media too. Someone did this to you, and you're victimized. Therefore, you're allowed to skirt the conversation and the Constitution and send them to Gitmo to be executed. And no constitutional rights for your enemies. Go for it. I mean, it's very interesting when you think about what they're doing and planting those seeds of the kind of vigilante fantasy that you get to have over and over and over again. What kind of a fantasy, what kind of a thought form does that develop?
Oh, yeah. It's all about a power. Like, if it's based in fear or control or power, then it's probably going to lead you to evil. I mean, if you're doing something, and then you catch yourself, I'm doing this because I'm afraid, I'm doing this because I want control, I'm doing this because of that, then you can say, I might be behaving in a way that's creating evil, or it's creating negativity in my life. And, so it's really cliche, but it kind of does come down to, are you functioning from fear? Are you functioning from love? And we're not great at it, but we just have to be honest about it.
Right. The step of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Is that how?
Yes, this is like, I feel like we're having like some kind of like meeting with people, like
it's an encounter group.
Yes, exactly. It's a lot of things, yeah.
Miss Olivia, we're going to take the last couple of questions. I'm going to remind everyone you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. What an amazing conversation with Gigi Young, and dealing with the hot zone and everything around it, and all these issues in the QA section. Miss Olivia.
Okay, a cult fan said, as the consciousness evolves, the intensity of the free will choice between good and evil is amplified. But also at this stage, we have the psychic tools to work smoothly through this. I'm going to actually disagree with him a little bit on this one. I feel that we have less free will on this one. I think that during this apocalyptic phase that we're going through, what our actual natures, our true natures, are being revealed to us, that we have very little control, because as life is kind of steamrolling through us, and sort of what you are is, if you are want to be a force for good, you feel the urge, you have to rise to the challenge. And I think those who are working out of fear, feel compelled to do that. there's very little control in it. So there seems to be this push-pull back and forth that's getting extreme, but I don't think we actually have choices about our roles in this battle that are going on right now, that we're being shown our roles.
Oh, it's really good. Yeah, all of it reminds me of Gurdjieff when you get into that, because Gurdjieff, the Sarmoon Brotherhood taught him that on Earth, humanity lives under 96 laws. Odd number there. But that the mechanicalness of the moon was something like 128. It was that much worse. And that by becoming conscious, you could strip away being subject to a set number of those 96 laws. That is, under ordinary circumstances, you live under these 96 laws, and they're very restrictive if you're just kind of unconsciously going through your day-to-day life. That is, somebody makes a mistake or holds you up in traffic and you get upset, and that's the end of your control, in a sense. You're under that law that you have this trigger mechanism and you get mad when somebody holds you up in line at Starbucks or something. So just to simplify it, but what happens is he feels that the more asleep you are, he calls it food for the moon, which is that the moon starts to consume you because you're under more and more laws, the more you're kind of robotic and mechanical through your daily life without that consciousness. So the idea really is that that awareness, that rise in awareness, has you not subjected so much to that mechanical reality, that you actually awaken to a certain degree, and then you start to impose your own will on the situation and the action through your own actions, and choose your own actions. So it's pretty interesting what you're saying, because I do feel like the nature of the situation and the demands of the environment are just becoming denser. So they're moving people more into that food for the mood stage. What am I missing there, Gigi?
I think you guys really covered it. I like the part that you said about lucidity. I think that, you know, what Olivia is saying is true as well, but also a cult fan is true. Everybody's, I think, onto something here, because what we have is people who are lucid to the laws, or the 96 laws, if it's, you know, what you're saying, and people who are not lucid to it. And the people who are not lucid to it are faced with a choice every day to wake up and become lucid, or they go deeper into sleep. And that's the pressurizing, I think, that is going on. It sort of creates a chain reaction in the soul. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And it kind of moves through all your wounds all the time. Every day you cycle through your wounds. That's what the moon does as well. Is it helps you cycle through all of your problems and stuff. And if you choose to not face them, then you go farther asleep. And that's where we are. So people are becoming more psychic, but there are also people that are falling more asleep.
That is fascinating. I 100% can see that. And it's interesting, the moon aspect. One quick thing I want to point out about J.G. Bennett talking about Gurdjieff, and people always think of Gurdjieff as this real taskmaster, but one of the things he emphasized so hardcore to Bennett was that just because Bennett had become aware of these laws and was getting away from them, he wasn't to look down on humanity that was mired in it. The idea was, if he could become awake, then he would have the ability to wake others up and to kind of show the nature, or what he called the terror of the situation. So it's very important to keep that in mind too, because very often I find when people discover the root character to these things, and they say, aha, humanity is stupid and I've become wise now, that they do, that there's a judgment factor, which is kind of like the last temptation on the path. And that is very interesting, because if anything, it's supposed to breed a kind of humility to discover those laws. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's also that's the highest thing you can ever do, is to serve. Like, I mean, gosh, there's no higher honor than to lead. There's no higher honor than to serve. I mean, that's where it's at. And so, I mean, you can absolutely know that if someone's like, well, I've figured it out, then you can absolutely probably know that they are probably not.
they're probably telling you Kabbalah arrests are around the corner.
They have all the answers, or things like that. That illusion of hierarchy is playing your victim, victimizer, polarity, duality, eighth sphere fiddle. You know, it's keeping you in that paradigm. So
fascinating, amazing stuff. Olivia, the last question of the night.
I'm going to ask you my question. Okay. So this reminded me, I think years ago you told me about, I think it's a head reader, like a skull reader about Moses. Does this ring a bell?
That's such a weird
I know, but there's, because he had
the skull reader of Moses. Yeah, this is a story that Ouspensky told. And what it is basically in a nutshell is that he read very obscure texts about the Old Testament. He would find the books that were banned and all the rest of it. And in one of them, there was a character who could read your physiognomy to figure out what type of character of person that you were. Is this person a serial killer? Is this person a Mother Teresa? Is this person, giver to humanity? Is that, and all the rest. And when he saw Moses, who was coming over to make a kind of a treaty with this other tribe, he said, "Get him immediately and bind him in chains, and he's a bad deal, and he's going to betray us, and all the rest of it." And the leader of the tribe was like, "No, Moses has been great. He's been helping us with all this stuff, and he's fighting against Pharaoh. You can't be right." And the guy was really confused because he was looking at this incredible reader, and then he was looking at Moses, who he knew and had figured these things out about. And he said, "I'm very, very confused." And so, as it turns out, he had Moses and the reader meet, and the reader looked at him and said, "Oh, you are somebody with the kind of a temperament that is completely selfish. You're homicidal. You're all these different aspects." And he's like, "You're a ruthless tribal leader, and I know what you're up to." And Moses said, "Well, that was my character when I was born, but I've overcome it. So you're seeing the kind of outlines in my face of what I was born into. But through my own learning, I've overcome those aspects of my character and my nature. And so that's why you can trust me." And it turns out they had a great relationship. But it is interesting because there are aspects that go beyond just what we kind of come in with, and it's what we develop. But that's an interesting and very obscure story. I
love that story. I've thought about that a lot over the years, because one thing I learned from watching Game of Thrones, it really helped me, is to really understand that we live in a narrative, a living narrative, right? We all have roles to play, and you want Cersei to be Cersei. You wouldn't want her to be anything. We need our villains in our stories,
the
right?
archetypes.
Yes, the archetypes, but those, because there would be without any conflict, there's no storyline, right? And there's no overcoming a challenge. There's no growth, right?
True, yes.
So, we are all serving each other through playing these different roles, if all life is a stage. But at the same time, there's always potential for redemption, for forgiveness, for upliftment, like Moses, up to this other higher level of being, right? You could be a scoundrel, right, by your nature, but somehow you can it's almost like that shock that you talk about, where you lift up an octave to a higher nature, where you identify up here.
Why were you staring at me with that scoundrel? You're absolutely right. And it's true. We have that opportunity, Gigi, the ability to change what we have become into something better.
Yeah, we're the magician, we're the alchemist. And that's that. And I love that you mentioned that, Olivia, because we were just talking about how, evil is just below us. And what if Moses took that and turned it into something? So it was really interesting to talk about those two things back to back, because that was a story of someone doing that.
Oh, true, absolutely.
Almost like that's what Olivia, I felt like that was what she was doing. Also really beautiful, because we're obviously at, this is the time of resurrection. This is the time of rebirth. And that's what, this Holy Week is about. It's about exactly that. It's about taking, maybe you were a scoundrel, maybe you were hurt. That's okay. Maybe you have things about you that are not good. And you can turn that around, and so I think I think redemption is important, and forgiveness, and this is the perfect weekend to talk about it.
Wow, the prodigal son returns home. Fascinating.
That's where we're at.
Or the prodigal daughter. The interesting thing about all it is really fascinating to bring up that Good Friday and Easter, that whole sense of renewal and resurrection. Things can change. Things can be different. The possibility exists. It may be a narrow window, but it is something to be worked through. Final question for Gigi Young.
I thought that was the one. Okay,
Well,
final
no,
question
that
for
one
Gigi.
was-
Okay.
That's a pretty good one.
Okay, Olivia Bishop. How do you think the Tuatha de Danann contact people?
Oh, interesting.
Oh, I like this question. Great question. Well, I think that they contact people who are asking questions. So if you want to know a certain question, I feel like they're available to answer that as guides. I feel like they've also left answers and information in books. They've incarnated here and left hints and secrets. So it's all around us, but you can also connect as well with the consciousness. And they've embedded their consciousness. Beings from higher spheres have embedded their consciousness here as the dimensions went down to be accessible.
You have to watch your interactions with the Tuatha de Danann because you may wind up looking like this person who apparently is on some kind of holy fire. Whenever I look at the Tuatha de Danann picture, it's always like, what is going on here? Fascinating. Amazing stuff, Gigi, of course, and we're all looking forward to your new variety show.
Yes, it's very soon.
Great stuff. Incredible work. And of course, all of your stuff is available at gigiyoung.com. So many of your videos available on YouTube on a multitude, really eclectic topics. I have to say, always surprising and engaging work. So thank you so much. And we'll be looking forward to working with you more on the X series because the work that you do is amazing, and the tuning in that you can do for these subjects is just crucial. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I'll be here.
Great. It's great to see you, Gigi. Miss Olivia?
Okay, so tonight was our first night with Super Chat.
We did.
And we did great. I could not keep track of everybody who donated, but Density McCartney, Resperagu, Ben Dover, Bilgamets, Doyle Wayne, Aether, really amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's incredible. And this is an unusual thing, which is, we'll do it for certain shows, and we did it. This is the first time that we had Super Chat in there. We've never run ads on any of our stuff, but the Super Chat idea was a little bit different, so we thought we'd give it a try. So thank you so much for your support of the program. And if you guys want to subscribe to darkjournalist.com, go there, subscribe to the newsletter, keep yourself updated. And if you subscribe and support the site, there's a number of things that you'll be included in as we get deep into this year and the events that are coming up and the great surprises that we have for you. An incredible lineup for spring. I'm so excited for what's happening here. And tonight is just a great way to kick it off with Gigi, whose work is I often say it about Gigi, there's no greater friend or ally to the show. We will be back next week, and we'll be going deeper into the hot zone progressively right up to our incredible live interview with Graham Hancock on May 25th. Thank you so much. I wanted to do a few shout outs out there. It's great. Carl Jung is out there, a cult fan. Of course, Jay Mallet, Julie Smith, thank you so much. And it was great to have Groovy Bean out there as well, doing some great moderating along with Dimensions and Beyond. Carly really helping us out. We will be back at the same time next Friday, going deep into the hot zone. And just you wait for what we have coming in terms of the revelations around the hot zone and the experts who are going to come forward to tell us their findings. Atlantis Rising, I'll tell you, we're going deep on this one. And I have a feeling that as the spring and the summer progresses, we're going to have more and more revelations along this line. Thank you so much for being with us. And I guess, Olivia, the last question is, what's for dinner?
I don't know. I don't really need dinner, but I just found this spectacular looking gelato, which is roasted strawberry. So I'm just roasted strawberry.
Wow.
So I'm so curious about it. I think that is that's.
You always find the weird flavors. Remember the one you found, which was it was Thanksgiving stuffing.
Oh, that would
ice
remind
cream.
me. Mm-hmm.
Who could do that?
It was actually Thanksgiving. It was all of Thanksgiving dinner combined into one ice cream.
No one can find the stuff like Olivia, everyone. But Gigi, what about dinner for you? What are you going to have for dinner?
I don't know, actually. I think I'm just going to have some water, actually. And
Are you clean?
Are you a breatharian? Is that what you're trying to tell us here?
No, I eat kind of clean. I eat pretty clean.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. We will see you all next week, and have a great weekend. Have an excellent Good Friday and a happy Easter. It's fantastic to see everyone. And
can I have the last word?
I think
it's your show. You should have the last word. Say, everybody, don't allow yourselves to get re-traumatized. Okay, this is what I have figured out this week, and I'm absolutely clear on, is that we have enough traumas to work with from this lifetime, from other lifetimes. The whole point is healing. And so with what happened with Notre Dame and whatnot, if you find yourself getting triggered, if you find yourself getting traumatized, change the channel, stop watching, do something else. What we don't need is more trauma. We need empowerment, and trauma will take you in the other direction. Okay.
Right, exactly. So if you see Rachel Maddow, just switch off the channel. We will see you next week. I thought you were going to talk about pickled jalapenos.
No.
That could be kind of traumatic. Depends on your palate.
If you have too many.
We will see you next week. Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Happy Easter.
That's triggering.